protect herself in the capital. Robb walked up to Sansa after seeing his other siblings off. "Be careful. You know how I feel about Joffrey." Sansa rolled her eyes but smiled. "I know. And while I completely disagree, I promise I will be careful," Sansa said with a smile. Robb smirked and stepped forward as Sansa's smile collapsed and she embraced her brother. It could very well be years before they would see one another again. "I'll miss you," Robb said, and he heard Sansa take in a haggard breath. Robb and Sansa may not have been overly close, but Sansa was Robb's first sister and the first person he ever learned to protect. For Sansa, other than her father, Robb was the first person that she looked to when trying to learn what a good man should be. They were shining examples to one another, and while they were different, they were part of the same pack. "I'll miss you too, Robb," she said sadly, sliding from his embrace. Lady Catelyn would stay behind with Rickon, Robb, and Margaery to help raise Rickon and teach Margaery, while Sansa, Arya, and Bran went to the capital with their father. The plan would be for Rickon and Catelyn to join them in a few years, and Robb and Margaery would rule in Winterfell from then on. The Starks, their 3 direwolves, and the king would arrive in King's Landing without incident. But things would not remain peaceful for long. Notes. Fun shit, right? Loved writing this chapter, and there is so much that I want to say about it. First, let's talk about that fight. So that was easily one of the most fun fights to write, and the best part about it was that when I was writing that fight I was listening to like heavy rock, so I'm just sitting there with Badis vibes writing about how Robb is kicking ass and taking names. Suffice to say I had a riot writing that fight scene, lol. Second, let's talk about Jaime, Cersei and Bran and how that whole thing ties into the fight. So it is important to show that a chain reaction occurred because of the fight between Joffrey and Robb. Joffrey gets hurt and his mother is forced to care for him. This stops her and Jaime hooking up while the hunt is going on. This means Bran never sees them and therefore he never falls. This also means that Bran goes with Lord Stark to King's Landing as planned. Joffrey also has to stay in the wheelhouse on the way back to King's Landing, which means that he never fights with Arya and Lady never dies. So huge implications come from Robb's fight with Joffrey. Third, this is the first chapter where I don't lay out word for word events that occurred in the books. I hope that this works for you guys, because in the next chapter I seriously abuse this and skip over a significant portion of the story because it is still very similar to what occurred in the books. My biggest fear in writing this story has been that technique of sort of letting you guys know that I am not going to rehash the books. Fourth, the extra scene with Robert at the end of the story with them in the forest was actually written just before posting this chapter. I wanted one really good display of how Robert is teaching Robb. Something that is sort of in your face, like hey, this is mentor to apprentice shit right here, lol. So again, really happy with how that turned out. Again, I am so glad that you have joined me on this journey. Fair warning, from here on out the story becomes very Robb focused as we deal with the consequences of Eddard going south. I promise before the story wraps up we will see fluff with Margaery again, but you have to remember that I want to keep true to the story. So I hope that you all continue to enjoy. Chapter 23, You Win or You Die. Notes. Please read. First, I realized after looking at this chapter and the next chapter that they really should have been one large chapter, so you are gonna get both today. Second, and more importantly, I know a lot of you have been wondering about Eddard's fate, and that story begins with this chapter. However, the chapter picks up after the events of King's Landing have taken place and Eddard has figured out about the royal children. I explain my reasoning below, but again, everything that happened at King's Landing in the books up until just after Eddard confronted Cersei is the same, and I have therefore skipped. This is also a chapter that abuses cinematic time, so if you feel lost I am really sorry. Scenes change time very quickly and I have done my best to indicate that. Hope you enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. In Winterfell things had been peaceful for Robb and Margaery. The only thing that had disturbed them was when Robb, Theon, Jon and their 2 direwolves were attacked by a group of Night's Watch deserters and wildlings. They slew all but one member of the group. A woman named Osha, who swore to serve if they spared her life. However, in King's Landing things had not been nearly as peaceful. Eddard had discovered the truth Jon Arryn had died for. After receiving the letter from Lysa Arryn in Winterfell, he had begun investigating only to find that the royal children did not belong to Robert but to Jaime and therefore had no claim to the throne. Robert and Eddard had had a falling out a fortnight prior over the assassination of Daenerys Targaryen. However, they quickly reconciled but the situation caused Robert to feel as though he needed to go hunting, leaving Eddard in charge. It was in that time that Eddard found out the truth about the children. He confronted the Queen hoping she would leave. When she had not fled, Eddard reached out to Loras Tyrell to speak with him about the situation and what might follow. Now Eddard stood in front of a dumbstruck Loras who was in shock over the decision Eddard had made. "Tell no one else," Loras said, closing windows and doors. "The fact that you already told the Queen has put all of us in danger." He finished, coming closer to the hand. "She deserved a chance to escape," Eddard said, but Loras was not having this. "She will use this chance to try to kill you. I will not leave your side and you should go nowhere without guards, Lord Stark. You must tell no one else. I cannot tell you who your friends or enemies are here save for myself." Loras assured and Eddard agreed, save for sending word to Stannis. No one else would know and Eddard would give himself a heavy guard presence until the king returned. Neither man could have expected the Queen would do what she did next. The king was going to die. After news had arrived that Robert had been mortally injured by a wild boar after he drunkenly tried to spear it, Loras had attempted to get Eddard to tell the king before he died. But Lord Eddard's honor could not be bent. He would not put such news on the king's shoulders as he lay dying. Lord Stark left the chamber where Robert lay dying with a letter naming him protector of the realm. "Give him milk of the poppy," Eddard commanded the Grand Maester, his words heavy. Loras watched as Lord Stark spoke with Varys and Barristan Selmy before joining Loras and his many guards. It was the dead of night and the two were walking back to Lord Stark's chambers when Renly Baratheon came running. Loras almost drew his sword when he heard the noise, as did the other guards, but when he saw it was Renly he relaxed. "Lord Stark, I wish to speak with you privately," Renly said, looking for Eddard to tell his guards to step away. "Loras, you may stay," Renly added, trusting Loras. Ned did so and he and Loras stood there with Renly. "He named you Lord Protector of the Realm," Renly stated and Ned nodded. "She won't care. Give me an hour and I can put 100 swords at your back," Renly said with confidence and urgency. "And what shall I do with 100 swords?" Eddard asked seriously. "Strike. While the castle sleeps. We need to get the royal children into our custody. Cersei would not dare move against you then," Renly said as if time was running out. "I will not shed blood in Robert's halls as he draws his last breath. I will not drag children from their beds screaming for their mother," Ned said, giving Renly a warning look. "Loras, tell him this is the right thing to do," Renly said, almost begging. "If not, Cersei will seize power and then we are all likely to die." Loras looked at Lord Stark and then back to Renly. "I will follow whatever decision the Hand makes, Lord Renly. You should do the same," he said as Renly looked on in shock. Loras loved Renly, but in that moment, he would remain by Lord Stark's side and keep his honor. Renly said nothing and immediately left. Loras and Eddard said nothing until they entered Lord Stark's chambers. "She killed him," Lord Stark said to Loras as the door shut. "I know," Loras asked, knowing Renly was right to want to strike, but Loras had made his choice. "Lord Stark, if you do not intend to strike, we need to get your children out of the city now," Loras said with urgency. "If the Queen does intend to harm you for what you know, they will be held hostage," Loras said very seriously. "I have a ship they can take in the morning and they," Ned began, only to be cut off by Loras. "No, Lord Stark. They need to leave right now," he said, making it clear that they needed to move. "If we wait it will be too late. You should escape as well." Lord Stark thought for a moment, then spoke. "You will take them now and ride for Winterfell. You can find safe haven in Riverrun on your way, but do not stay long. Winterfell will be the only truly safe place for them," he ordered. "I will give you most of my guard and send Jory with you and my steward and his family," Lord Stark said. "It was important to evacuate everyone now. My whole guard will come with us, but Lord Stark, you cannot mean to stay," Loras said. He could tell Ned was going to see this through. I would never be able to raise my head high again if I ran now. Lord Stark said. You may not be able to raise it at all if you do not. Loras countered, but Lord Stark was ready with a response. If I leave now and suddenly begin raising my forces, it is likely even my own allies will not come to my side. I have no proof. I need something more. Eddard said. Loras, even with Renly's help we would not be able to stop the Lannisters. If we do not have the City Watch there is no stopping Cersei anyways. In fact, even if we made an ally of every lord at court and had all of their retainers and knights with us, we would still not be able to stand against the City Watch. I need the gold cloaks to strike against the Queen. Ned said, standing from his desk. If I can get the City Watch under my control, we can stop the Lannisters here. Lord Stark paused before continuing. But if I cannot, I need them to take me prisoner or kill me for our alliance to come down on the Lannisters. He said with conviction. Loras in shock at what he was suggesting. Lord Stark, you cannot, Loras began, only to be cut off by Eddard. It is the only way to ensure that the Lannisters are stopped. Either I do it with the gold cloaks or you and my son lead the greatest army Westeros has ever seen to their front door. He said with a raised voice. Lord Stark calmed himself and Loras spoke again. The City Watch will betray you. Loras said sadly. I know. Lord Stark replied, sitting down again. Stannis is the true heir to the throne. Eddard began changing the subject. He had just told Loras he would essentially be sacrificing himself to bring justice to the Lannisters. It was the most noble thing Loras had ever seen, but now he immediately changed subjects to who should be king. Stannis commands no love. Renly would be a better king. Loras said. If we support someone, it should be someone who deserves the crown. Stannis will show no mercy and he will not stop until his enemies are destroyed root and stem. Loras said with conviction. You misunderstand me, Sir Loras. Lord Stark began. I said Stannis is the true heir. I made no predictions about whether he would be a good king. But I do not believe Renly would be a good king either. Commanding love, throwing balls, and surrounding yourself with handsome men and beautiful women does not make you a good king. What happens when Renly has to make the hard decisions? What happens when his men are dying all around him on the field of battle? What happens when he needs to decide whether a man lives or dies? I have seen men like Renly. He will break under the pressure or be indecisive in rule because above all Renly loves to be loved. A ruler must be willing to make the hard choices even if they cause him to be reviled by his people. Ruling the Stormlands and the realm are two very different beasts. I would support Stannis not because he will be a good king but because honor compels me to. Lord Stark finished, leaving Sir Loras stunned. Eddard was right and Loras knew it. But there was another issue. The question might split our alliance, my lord. Loras said. Some will want to support Renly while others will want Stannis. What shall we do then? If we break, we will be destroyed by the Lannisters and each other. Loras said, knowing that they were in a very poor situation. Lord Stark smiled. If I am not betrayed, Stannis will be king. There is nothing that can stop that. But if I am taken, our alliance will be able to crown whomever they choose, just as we did with Robert. Lord Stark said calmly. If I am betrayed, find someone worthy of the crown. Find someone who commands well, loves the people, works hard, and is willing to make the hard choices. Lord Stark finished ordering Loras. Loras was stunned but knew he needed to get the children out of the city. Lord Stark ordered him to take Syrio Forel with him as he was trustworthy and would provide extra protection. As Loras was leaving, he turned to Eddard one last time. What will your family do without you, my lord? Loras asked, hoping this would get Lord Stark to leave with him. Eddard smiled. I trust their future and the North to Robb. He is ready and I know he will not lead them astray. He said, nodding for Loras to leave. Loras woke the children and their direwolves and immediately left in the dark. Sansa fought a bit but Loras put her on his own horse to make sure she did not try anything. They wanted to see their father but there was no time. Loras, Syrio, Valen and Jane Poole, Jory, the Stark children and their direwolves rode hard out of the city for Riverrun. As they did, Renly Baratheon also escaped. Lord Stark sat in his chambers. He had spoken with Petyr Baelish, who promised him the gold cloaks because of his love for Lady Stark. Eddard did not believe him. Lord Stark knew Robert would die, and the next day Eddard of the House Stark would likely also meet him in the grave. However, in doing so, he would bring the wrath of the North down on the Lannisters in the form of a young wolf. Notes. So on my decision to not change everything leading up to Robert's death and Eddard's capture other than Laura's saving the kids, I looked at the changes I made in the story and analyzed whether that would have an effect on what occurred, and it did not. There was also a second more important change that I wanted to make, and that was that Eddard wanted to get captured as a sort of sacrifice to stop the Lannisters. With him captured, the Alliance would march to war. His plan was that if he could stop the Lannisters with the City Watch he would, but if he couldn't he would need Robb to march the Alliance down to destroy the Lannisters. The only way to accomplish this was to either be captured or killed. I didn't want the reason Ned is captured to be because he was stupid. But it was also important for me to recognize that even though Ned is an honorable man, the houses of Westeros would need more than just his word to rise against a new king. They would need something tangible, and so he laid his life down for the sake of justice, to force the Alliance into action. So in my story he is taken prisoner not because he is an idiot but because he is making a sacrifice for the greater good and especially for his family. Chapter 24, Backed into a Corner. Notes. Please read. This is another chapter that abuses cinematic time for the sake of telling you parts of the story that are necessary but don't really warrant being flushed out. I thought about having the events happen off screen and then having them explained later, but that just wasn't working for me. I hope you all enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Tyrion Lannister made his way as fast as he could to the small council chambers where he knew his sister and brother were. He had heard the news just after it had happened. Lord Stark tried to seize the king and was captured, being held on charges of treason. Tyrion knew Eddard would not do this without a reason, and Tyrion knew the reason. Eddard knew about the children. Tyrion had already realized as long ago. He loved his family and so said nothing. Who would have believed him anyways? More troubling was word that every lord, knight, and retainer from the North, Vale, Reach, and Riverlands at court had suddenly left after Lord Stark was seized. Tyrion could see the writing on the wall, and he did not like what he read. Tyrion was given entrance by the Lannister guard at the door and began yelling as he entered. How many different kinds of insane do you have to be to seize Eddard Stark? Tyrion was seething as he saw his brother and sister sitting at the small council table. I do not know why you are so angry, little brother. Ned Stark was committing treason. He needed to be stopped. Cersei said, sipping her wine. By having him thrown in a black cell. Tyrion yelled back at her. Do you have any idea what you have done? Protected the king from a treasonous hand who wished to seize power for himself. Jaime repeated the official story to Tyrion, who at this point lost his control. You are both blind idiots. The lords from the North, Vale, Reach, and Riverlands have left the capital and you have taken Lord Stark prisoner. Treason or not, they will be coming for us with an army we cannot stop. He said, looking at them dumbstruck. Cersei chuckled in response. Why would they attack us while we hold their lord captive? They would not dare attack while we could take his head. Cersei said, knowing that killing Eddard was not the objective. Because Robb Stark will call your bluff. Tyrion responded simply. I know him well enough to know that he will see right through you. He knows that you cannot kill Eddard without setting him permanently against us, and he knows that his father would not want him to accept poor terms for his own freedom. Tyrion said as Jaime finally came around to realizing how bad this might be. If you let Ned Stark go to placate the Northern Alliance, he will never stop shouting that Joffrey is a bastard born of incest. But if you keep him hostage, the North would come south and kill us all. Tyrion said, making his point. We can make him speak what we want. There are ways to make a man say what you want him to say. Cersei said, referring to torturing Ned. Yes, what a wonderful idea, sister. Let us torture our only hostage to the point that he is no longer able to deny the great truth that is King Joffrey. I am sure the Northern Alliance will be oh so happy to have their lord back in pieces. Tyrion said, deadpanning at Cersei. The problem is not even that will work. Ned Stark is a warrior and he will not break under torture. You will kill him before he breaks. Tyrion said, and Jaime realized this was true. Jaime finally came around and realized the position they were in. What would you recommend, Tyrion? Jaime asked, hoping his brother had a solution. We need the Stark children. If we have them, we can convince Ned to admit to his crimes, take the Black and go to the war. That will placate his alliance and give Joffrey legitimacy. Tyrion said with a sort of distaste for his own idea. The Stark children escaped in the night. Our information said they would be leaving this morning, but it was wrong. Cersei said, disgusted but knowing her little brother was right. Well then, go find them. Tyrion said matter-of-factly. They will be heading north, you need to find them before they reach Riverrun. Tyrion said, looking at his brother who stood. I will find them and bring them back. Jaime made his way for the door. Tyrion knew they had wasted time basking in their victory over the wolf, only to realize capturing the alpha does not tame the pack, it enrages the pack. Jaime. Tyrion said, getting his brother to turn around. If you do not find them, this is not a fight we can win. It was a warning. Jaime nodded his head and left. Tyrion sat down with his sister. He lost the game. I was willing to do the things he wouldn't. Cersei said, almost as if trying to convince herself that she had beaten Eddard. In the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die. She repeated. Tyrion chuckled and Cersei shot him a disgusted look. No, Eddard Stark won the game when he married his son to Margaery Tyrell. You just weren't smart enough to see that. Tyrion said solemnly. Jaime had ridden from the city, but after a few days, Jaime had still not found the children. However, Loras and his charges were facing down a different threat. A handful of gold cloaks and Lannister soldiers were attacking a Night's Watch caravan, and Jory Castle had rashly committed to saving them. Thankfully they were successful, and Loras had witnessed a tall boy with black hair swinging around a log like a hammer, crushing the gold cloaks. Loras was stunned by the strength of this particular young man. Thank you, my lords. Yoren, their leader, said. I am not sure why they were set on us. Suddenly, Jory recognized the boy with the log. Gendry. Jory went up to the boy. Your Lord Stark's guard. Gendry said, and Jory nodded. Jory informed the boy, Yoren, and Loras that Gendry was Robert Baratheon's bastard. Jory told them that the caravan would be safer if Gendry came with them. They already had a target on them, and adding Gendry to their party would not make a difference. Loras reluctantly agreed, and they continued riding for Riverrun. Back in Winterfell, Robb, Margaery, Theon, and Jon were enjoying breakfast together when Maester Luwin brought the Raven scroll bearing the news. Treason? Robb questioned, having read the scroll aloud. Jon was standing, and Margaery looked to be in shock. You are summoned to King's Landing to swear fealty to the new king. Maester Luwin said without joy. He hated the words coming out of his own mouth. The news of treason by Lord Stark meant that he was stripped of all titles and holdings, making Robb the new Lord of Winterfell. At least in the eyes of the new king. Joffrey has my father thrown in chains, now he wants his ass kissed. Robb said as Jon looked about to explode. This is a royal command, my lord. If you should refuse, Maester Luwin began, but Robb cut him off. Oh, I won't refuse. If Joffrey summons me to King's Landing, I'll go to King's Landing. Robb began, and Margaery felt her stomach drop. She did not want him to go. Margaery feared what Robb would say next. But not alone. Robb said, handing the scroll back. Jon and Theon both smirked as Robb spoke again. Call the banners. Robb said without so much as flinching. He was angry, and he was going to ride to war. Margaery felt her whole world coming apart, but she knew she couldn't stop this. Robb needed to save Ned. All of them, my lord? Luwin asked, a smirk forming on his lips. They have all sworn to defend my father, haven't they? Robb asked. They have. Luwin responded. Now we see what their words are worth. Send word to Highgarden, Riverrun, and the Eyrie. Tell them I am going to save my father and I could use some company. Robb finished as a smirking Luwin went off. Robb sat down and took his wife's hands. No words would be exchanged. None could be. The North was marching to war. But they wouldn't be going alone. The winter roads made the gathering of troops across the North easier. The northern mountain clans came bringing their champions with their massive battle axes. Ships brought wild Skagasi warriors to who normally ruled themselves but answered the call from Winterfell. Robb would have access to a host that would be comparable to the host Torrhen Stark marched against Aegon. The new standard equipment was also present in many of the northern houses and the soldiers were well kitted for a fight. The north had some of the most elite warriors in the world and Robb was bringing 30,000 of them south. Across the realm, banners were called. When news reached Winterfell, Highgarden, and Riverrun, each called their forces. However, word reached Robb that the Vale was not mustering. Only Runestone, the castle of House Royce, was calling its banners. Robb asked his mother to go and speak with Aunt Lysa on his behalf just as Lady Olenna Tyrell passed Blackwater Bay heading for Gulltown. Olenna brought news with her that would bring the Vale back onto the side of the Northern Alliance. In the west, Tywin Lannister called his banners. Once word reached him that Cersei had taken Lord Stark, he knew what was coming. When Jaime could not find the Stark children, Tywin summoned him to help lead the Lannister army. The Lion prepared to strike the Riverlands with 35,000 men. Margaery watched as soldiers poured into Winterfell and her wolf prepared to leave. He had brought 20,000 men to Winterfell and would gather the forces south of Winterfell on the march to Moat Cailin. By the time he reached the Neck his full 30,000 men would be assembled. The night before they were set to march from Winterfell, Robb had won the other lords' loyalty by demonstrating his strength of will. The Great Jon lost 2 fingers to Grey Wind but Robb gained his near-blind loyalty. Margaery stood at the gates now, her belly rounded from her and Robb's child. He kissed her with passion. He kissed her with need. Robb did not want to leave, and Margaery did not want him to leave. But both knew he was the only man who could lead the North. One last kiss and Robb had to turn away. She felt him leave. She wanted to run after him but as he mounted his horse, the tears rolled down her eyes. He looked back, his eyes said, "I'm sorry, I love you," and then with the kick of his horse he was gone. Jon and Theon went with him south. Her husband rode south with an army to war not knowing if he would ever return. Chapter 25, The Lion and the Wolf. Notes. Please read. Okay, this one is a doozy. So there are a couple of things I need everyone to keep in mind when reading this chapter. 1. This chapter opens after Olenna has revealed the treachery of Lysa. This is not covered in detail, you just have to know that Olenna got Lysa. 2. This chapter abuses cinematic time more than any other chapter in this story. If you feel lost when a scene suddenly feels like it is hundreds of miles from where the previous scene was, that is because the scenes have likely been separated by days to weeks. This single chapter could have been broken down into 7 or 8 chapters but for my sanity I condensed it into 1. Basically, if you feel lost, assume there has been a short time skip. 3. This is not a character-driven chapter. It is designed to quickly give you a top-down view of what is going on in terms of battles. Most of the battles in this chapter are not explored in great detail and this chapter is designed to help us move the story forward. 4. One of the big things about this fic was that I never intended to release it. Had I thought I would, this chapter would have been written a different way. If it is confusing or you are struggling to follow what is going on, ask in the comments and I will clear up your confusion. I keep extensive notes on this story and will be able to answer most if not all of your questions. 5. Have fun reading this. I know there is a lot of whipping around Westeros happening here but I will try not to do this type of chapter too often. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. No. You can't do this. I am the Lady of the Vale. Lysa screamed as she was dragged off by guards as Robert Arryn screamed that she had killed his father. Lady Olenna and Lady Stark watched the scene unfold in front of them. Olenna had revealed that Lysa Arryn had killed Jon Arryn on the request of Petyr Baelish. She proved this by presenting messages she had intercepted between the two. Now the Vale rallied behind Lord Royce. Aelys Arryn was quickly named Robert's regent and she gave Yohn Royce full authority to wage war against the Lannisters. The Knights of the Vale mustered for war. The same afternoon that Lysa Arryn was thrown into a sky cell, Lady Olenna walked to where her wheelhouse was with Lady Stark to leave for the Reach. She would go to Gulltown and then back to Highgarden. Lady Olenna, I cannot thank you enough for this. Lady Stark said to the woman who had flipped the veil. I only wish I could have done more and done it sooner. Olenna said regretfully. Her spies had not been able to see through the treachery of the Lannisters until after Lord Stark had been taken, but now, she would do what she could for her combined family. The Reach is marshalling its full force. My grandson Garland sails from Old Town to Seaguard with 20,000 men. My son will bring the rest of our 60,000 soldiers to Robb by land once they are mustered. I need to return to Robb. He will have begun his march by now. Lady Stark said with fear in her eyes. Lady Olenna placed her hand on Catelyn's cheek. It is your instinct to worry for him. But please know, Robb is one of the most intelligent and capable young men I have ever met in my long life. I believe he will surprise the Lion and you as well. Olenna smiled and she and Lady Stark said their goodbyes. Lady Stark then prepared to deliver the news personally to Robb with her uncle Bryden and Sir Roderick escorting her. Further north, Robb was making his first strategic decision of the war. We will not be able to cross the Twins in time. Walder Free will not open his gates for us. We have to cross at the Ruby Ford, said Rickard Karstark. If we cross at the ford we run into a situation where we are likely to have to fight the Lannisters on poor ground. They will seize the dry ground and force us to fight in the waters where our numbers will not be an advantage to us. Robert used the same strategy against Rhaegar's larger army, and the prince was fool enough to take the fight. It will be a slog, and if we win, we will have taken so many losses that marching on the capital will be out of the question. Roose Bolton said correctly. The Ruby Ford would not work as a crossing. The Lannister forces had punched into the Riverlands with 35,000 soldiers after the Mountain had taken 500 men and burned the Riverlands, forcing the Riverlords to hold their muster and defend their keeps. Tywine faced almost no resistance when he took Wayfarer's Rest. He then split his force and Jaime Lannister took 15,000 men and laid siege to Riverrun while Tywine blocked Robb's crossing at the Ruby Ford. Tywine took Pink Maiden, Stonehenge, Harrenhal, and Darry in quick succession. Robb considered each man's advice as he listened. They would be at the Twins tomorrow and they needed to know whether they were attempting a crossing or continuing south. We cannot be certain of Walder Frey's loyalty. Jon spoke up now. His son is married to Tywine's sister. He correctly pointed out. Unfortunately, Lord Bolton is correct. Robb said, making his decision. A head-on fight at the ford could cost us the war. He stopped, looking at their map. We attempt a crossing at the Twins. If Walder Frey will not allow it, we take the Twins. He said, and his lords all nodded. Robb dismissed them and Jon and Theon remained. Has there been any word from the Vale? Robb asked both of them. We have heard rumors but nothing for certain. Some are saying your mother convinced the Knights of the Vale to rally, others say they are riding to attack us, but our scouts are reporting no movement against us. Theon replied. Just then the flap of the tent opened to reveal Robb's mother, Sir Roderick and Sir Brynden Blackfish Tully. Mother! Robb and Jon said in unison as she hugged them both. My sons! She breathed as she held them both as close as she could. Catelyn released them and cupped both of their faces with her hands. It feels like only yesterday you were both running through Winterfell dumping snow on the guards, and now you are leading a host to war. She gave them a proud but sad smile. Her sons were no longer children but warriors. The two went and embraced their uncle next. What word from the Vale? Robb asked. His mother and uncle filled them in on Lysa's treachery and Olenna's aid. She also told them that the Knights of the Vale rode to war. Their uncle explained their war plan. The Vale would strike at Tywine Lannister. Their intention would be to do hit-and-run attacks, keeping Tywine's attention and forcing him to engage them. Their army of 30,000 would attempt to draw the Lannisters towards the Bloody Gate. If they could do this, the Vale would crush Tywine's army in the gate. If not, Robb needed to cross the Twins and use the distraction that the army of the Vale made and crush Jaime Lannister. The plan still hinged on Robb getting across the Twins. Attacking the Ruby Ford was still out of the question. A fight there, even with more men, could devastate their army. They needed to cross, and they needed to cross soon. They arrived at the Twins the next day. Robb met with his lords to discuss the plan. We need terms and we need them soon. Lord Sewin pointed out. If we do not cross, the army of the Vale's distraction will be lost to us and the Kingslayer will take Riverrun. We cannot wait for a siege. Sewin continued. Then we storm the Twins. Theon said. We have the men. Lord Tully declared for our cause, Rob. If Walder Free means to deny us a crossing, he should be removed. Theon finished passionately. We could lose our host here in an assault. John pointed out. The Twins was not like other castles. It was well defended and held natural choke points that made an assault extremely difficult. An army would have to attack one of 2 points on the castle, allowing the Frees to very easily bring men and bottleneck the attackers. Just as they were considering allowing themselves to take terms from Walder Free, a guard bid he be allowed to enter. Rob allowed this, and standing next to him was Garland Tyrell. Rob. Garland said, smiling as the two men embraced. You would not believe how perfect your timing is, Garland. Rob said. Garland had brought 20,000 men from the Reach, and they were beginning to set their siege line on the other side of the river. They had been ferried from Old Town to Seaguard by the Red Wine Fleet and now were poised to link up with Rob's 30,000. Rob was informed later that day that 2 guards from the Twins bid they be allowed to treat. They entered his tent during the late afternoon with all the lords present. Garland had gone back over to his army knowing what Rob intended to do. Our Lord Free bids you welcome, Sir Rob. He would be honored if you came into the Twins so you and he could come to terms regarding. The guard began, only for Rob to cut him off. Your Lord Free is sworn to House Tully, and House Tully has declared for our cause. If your Lord Free wants terms, here they are. He will open his gates by sunrise tomorrow, or my forces and the forces of the Reach on the other bank of the river will storm his castle and end his line by leave of House Tully. Rob finished his terms laid out, the guards stunned at the aggression in his words. They realized very quickly the young wolf was not bluffing. The next morning Rob waited to see if the gates would open for him. They did. Rob was greeted by Stephen Free, who told them that Lord Walder Free had fallen down a flight of stairs during the night and died. This had been his excuse as to why they were slow to open their gates. Rob suspected otherwise. Stephen or someone else had murdered the Lord of the Crossing when Walder decided he wanted to test the young wolf in battle. The wiser phrase put a stop to this. Rob did not have proof of this, and it worked in his favor, so he did not press the issue. He and his host marched south to Riverrun, now more than 50,000 strong. Upon getting closer to Riverrun, Rob met with his lords again. Our scouts report that Jaime Lannister rides with his outriders to hunt down those river lords that are still nipping at the lion's tail. Brynden Tully said in the war tent. Then we use that our advantage. Rob said before laying out their plan. They were near Seaguard and their advance and crossing had not yet been discovered. We will ride with a cavalry force and lure the Kingslayer into the Whispering Woods. There we will surround him and capture him. Rob said. Why capture him, my lord? Lord Glover spoke up. Why not simply kill him? Many of the other lords nodded in agreement. If we capture him, we can trade him for my father. They can have the Kingslayer and we will get what we want out of this. Rob pointed out. The whole purpose for their march was to free Ned, and this would do that in one strike. They would remove the head of Jaime Lannister's army and easily route it from Riverrun afterwards. The trap was set, and the lion was all too happy to run right into it. Brynden came riding through the forest with his 300 or so men. He blew a war horn, and suddenly, as the Kingslayer and his men chased after them, arrows came flying from the trees and the cavalry force descended on the Kingslayer. The knights and northern cavalry smashed into the outriders as arrows were loosed from the tree line. When he realized he was surrounded, Jaime rode hard at Rob Stark, only for his horse to be killed by an arrow. He was then met on foot by Garland Tyrell, who fought him in single combat until Jaime was surrounded and forced to surrender. Rob's army caught up with the strike force and the next day routed the Lannister army at Riverrun, inflicting massive casualties while losing very few men. In both, the Battle of the Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps, the Stark Tyrell host took next to no damage. Rob would very quickly receive a boon for his efforts as his force moved into Riverrun. As the siege was lifted, Loras Tyrell and the Stark children arrived at Riverrun. They had been unable to take a direct route to the castle, which made them take longer than expected. They had been forced to hide in villages or castles, dodging and outmaneuvering the hunters sent to find them. Sansa was the first one that Rob saw, and he embraced her while still in his armor. Arya and Bran came running and he held them tight to his chest. When Lady Catelyn was able to join the army, she approached her children unable to form words and held them. She wept with them in her arms as Jon joined them. Her children were safe. Robb knew he needed to do everything he could to keep them safe. A messenger came the next day from the Ruby Ford. Tywin Lannister had not been drawn into the Bloody Gate and was retreating across the ford. Robb deduced that Tywin must have realized that the Vale was trying to bait him and was now attempting to link up with Jaime. Only now Jaime was no longer in command of an army and Tywin had no idea. "We have an opportunity to cripple the Lannister army here and now," Robb said, speaking with his lords in Riverrun. "If the Knights of the Vale attack him at the Ruby Ford now as he retreats while we fall on him with a cavalry force from the west, we could cripple Lannister power and force them to negotiate. With the Kingslayer as our hostage and their armies gone, the smart move would be to sue for peace," Robb said. There was unanimous agreement. The lords now trusted Robb's instincts and fully committed to the plan. Robb sent a rider to Yohn Royce. His message: attack Tywin Lannister and look to the west. Between the army of the Reach, the army of the North, and the Tullifrey forces, Robb had nearly 10,000 mounted knights and northern cavalry. Gendry asked Robb if he could join them to take revenge on the Lannisters for killing his father. Jory had filled Robb in about who Gendry was, and Robb agreed to allow Gendry to join them. Ciri O'Forel also asked to join and Robb brought him on at Arya's recommendation. They rode hard through the night and just as the sky began to brighten ever so slightly, they arrived at the ford. The cavalry force arrived in time to see the battle between the Lannister and the Knights of the Vale in full swing. The Lannisters must have been caught by surprise as they were struggling to form ranks and it was only going to get worse. "A pleasure to see you, Lord Tywin," Theon mocked as the cavalry formed ranks. The horses breathed the morning air, catching their breath as Robb felt a certain sense of joy rising in him. The cavalry was on a wide but shallow hill overlooking the Ruby Ford. "Feel like hunting some lion today, brother?" Jon asked Robb with what must have been a smile even though Jon's face was covered by his helmet. Robb only smirked in response. Robb formed his cavalry lines. There would be no speeches nor lofty words. Robb was surrounded by his friends and knew what needed to be done. He gave the command, pushed down his face mask and charged. Robb felt the hooves of 10,000 horses in his chest. The ringing of battle below them getting louder as the cavalry strike force charged the Lannister flanks. The sun was rising in front of them. Lannister men looked west and saw 10,000 armored warriors bearing down on them. A Silver Lord leading them. As the sun rose it reflected off of Robb's armor and the Lannister men at arms thought it was the warrior incarnate bearing down on them. Terrified, they fled as Robb's army smashed into their own. The Lannister army was routed and when the counting of the dead and wounded was done, Robb had been told that near 7,000 Lannister soldiers had died and another 3,000 had been captured or were too injured to retreat. It was one of the most resounding victory in the history of Westeros. Tywin Lannister retreated to Harrenhal but Tywin's 10,000 men could not defend the ruin and he risked being surrounded by the army of the Vale and Robb's cavalry force who were in hot pursuit and would arrive at Harrenhal soon. Tywin left with most of his army leaving the mountain at Harrenhal to slow Robb Stark's army as Tywin fell back with his 10,000 to King's Landing. Robb had not received word in time that Tywin Lannister had fled and prepared to storm Harrenhal, which is where Robb came face to face with the mountain. Robb had led a strike force over a ruined section of the walls to open the gates for the army. He had been accompanied by Loras, Jon, Theon, Garlan, Gendry, Ciri O'Forel, Robar Royce, and 25 other volunteers. One of the volunteers was a Northern Mountain clan champion named Abadal Stongbeard. A tall man with a long brown beard and broad shoulders. Unfortunately for the strike force, the guards on duty that night were paying attention. The group had been caught in the open behind the walls and now had to fight their way to the gate. That was when the mountain came at them with 50 men. Robb was cut off from the group with Abadal and the two stood alone against the mountain and 20 of his best knights while the other 30 went to fight the men trying to open the gate. As Robb's force fought their way to the gate, Abadal and Robb were separated and now Robb faced down the mountain alone while Abadal faced down his knights. Abadal's large two-handed battle axe ready to be bathed in Lannister blood. Robb could only dodge the mountain's strikes as he swung at the young wolf. Robb was able to hit the mountain several times but even Frost had trouble getting through the mountain's massive plate armor. Robb would likely stab through the armor but getting close enough to make such a move would be suicide. That was when Robb remembered Roderick's first lesson on armor. No matter how thick the plate, armor is always weak at the joints. Robb made his move. Clegane made a wild backhand swing at Robb and missed. Robb saw Clegane's shield arm open wide and Robb hit the elbow joint with everything he had. The arm went limp and the mountain screamed in pain. Robb was unsure if he crushed the arm or just made it unusable, but the mountain could no longer lift his shield and so in a moment of calm unstrapped the large tower shield from his arm. A poor decision, as this gave Robb freedom to begin attacking the mountain's left knee. Over and over Robb would dodge Clegane's strikes and hit his left knee. Finally, Robb saw it began to give and in the heat of battle made his war cry heard. I have a wife and child at home, Clegane, and I would move mountains to get back home to them. Robb paused as the mountain reared up to swing at him. Robb raised his shield to block for the first time in their fight. If he was wrong about what would happen next, this strike would kill him. But I'll settle for just killing you. The knee buckled and the mountain began to fall, his sword glanced off of Robb's shield as the leg gave out below him. The mountain came low enough, and Robb yelled as he drove frost through the thinner plate on the helmet where Clegane's eyes were and felt his sword drive through the man's skull. The mountain crumbled beside Robb as the sun began to rise. Abadal had killed the 20 knights and looked on as Robb faced down the rest of the mountain's garrison who had finally been roused for battle. Nearly 400 men streamed down the parapets and towers of Harrenhal and into the yard where the fight was taking place. Robb stood looking up at them, tired, but not finished. Robb knew this might be the end. He had killed the mountain but faced down 400 men. Robb did the only thing he could in that moment. He unlatched his helm and dropped it to the ground. Then came a roar from Robb's lips. A howling battle cry. A challenge. Who would face him? Who would be the first to die? He formed no words and gave no indication as to what he wanted. Robb just yelled. The mountain's men froze in terror. Robb felt his lungs about to run out of air when he felt objects fly by his head coming from behind him. Axes and wolves. Hundreds of throwing axes flew past his head and 2 dire wolves sprinted past his hips, him felling the men that were frozen by his battle cry. Robb in a fury charged, followed by Abadal, followed by tens of thousands of soldiers as his strike force had opened the gates. The Lannister men surrendered Harrenhal shortly after the gates opened. The only survivors of Robb's strike force were Robb, Jon, Loras, Theon, Garlan, Gendry, Syrio, Robar, and Abadal. For crushing both Jaime Lannister and Tywin Lannister, the small folk began calling Robb the Lion Tamer. The Riverlands were saved and the lords could retake their homes and lands. The Lannisters were crippled and Robb was poised to attack the capital. But during all this, within the walls of King's Landing, something was about to happen that would change this from a war of rescue to a war of vengeance. Notes. If that chapter gave you whiplash, I apologize, lol. I may go back and rewrite the 7 or so chapters that this chapter consists of, but I'm not gonna make any promises. There are a lot of pieces to unpack here, so I will try to start in order of how they appear in the story. Lysa got. Olenna was able to find out about her treachery. Now this is important because it brings the Vale back into play on Robb's side. Olenna could not, however, stop the Lannisters in time before Ned because of how quick those events occurred. Gendry and Syrio have joined your party. Yes, I have FF7 Remake, yes, it's very fun. So I added these 2 to Robb's group because they are going to become a part of something very important later on. Also come on, we want to see these 2 fight for justice, right? Abadal Strongbeard is not an OC of my own making. Abadal is inspired by the character Abadolf Strongbeard, who was a character created by a legendary extra on Game of Thrones named Endre McClay. Look up his story, it is pretty cool, but basically he was a reoccurring extra on the show and so made a story for his character. Seriously, check it out, it's really cool and fun. Abadal, however, is not the same character and is just inspired by Abadolf. Abadal is a ridiculous northern clansman with a thick axe, lol. Yes, Robb killed the mountain. Did I mention Robb was up in this story? Just thought I should mention that, lol. So I know Harrenhal is still a beast castle and that running into it is no small thing. But I allowed it in this story by just sort of assuming there was at least one collapsed wall that was never fixed and that 500 men couldn't hold it against like 40,000 once the gates were opened. The Lannister army has been practically destroyed and a chapter exploring how bad this is for the Lannisters will be forthcoming. Not sure if anyone noticed, but Garlan being at the Whispering Woods meant the Karstarks survived, so you can consider that problem solved, lol. I can't think of anything else I need to bring up, but I will edit these notes if I think of anything. Please comment and ask questions on this chapter because I know I threw a lot at you guys here. I promise I won't do it again. I never intended to publish this story, and so I only ever wrote this for me. I just want to say thank you for understanding that this has been an incredible journey so far for me. Had I known I was going to publish this, I would have written this chapter to be more reader-friendly, lol. But still, I hope you all enjoyed. Chapter 26, I Grew Up with Soldiers. Notes. The chapter following this one is pretty short, so I'm going to give you this and the next chapter today. Hope you all enjoy. Also, I'm glad you all liked last chapter and it wasn't too confusing. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. We need to trade Lord Stark for Jaime. Tyrion said to his sister in the small council chamber. You do not have a position on the small council or at the king's side, you do not get to decide what we do. If you had not sent Jaime out there, he would not have been captured. Cersei said, wanting to listen to her younger brother. Father will free him and then we will crush the Starks. Cersei finished. Father is outnumbered and now he has been outmaneuvered. If we wait too long, Robb Stark might just take Jaime's head out of spite. Tyrion calmly said, although he did not believe Robb would. Even Tyrion had underestimated Robb's ability in the field. He had not expected Robb in the south so quickly. Tyrion had been hounding his sister for days to trade Lord Stark for Jaime to deal with the north for now. With that done, their father could move his army to King's Landing and deal with Stannis and Renly. Maybe, if they were very lucky, get some of the Alliance members to turn to the Lannisters' side through diplomacy. Perhaps placate the North with an offer of gold or positions of power. Possibly, royal concessions if necessary. Neither Renly nor Stannis had declared themselves kings yet, but Tyrion knew it was only a matter of time. They would soon be fighting a war on three fronts, and Robb Stark, who was the biggest threat, just destroyed Jaime's half of the Lannister army. I will not have you dictating peace terms when you are not on the small. Cersei stopped as Varys entered the chambers looking grim. My lord, your grace. I just received word from the field. Varys paused, looking somewhat panicked. Lord Tywin's force has been defeated by Robb Stark and Yohn Royce. My birds tell me your father lost half of his army. Half. Tyrion nearly yelled as Cersei stood quickly but silently. Tyrion looked to her to see what she would do. They had lost more than 2/3 of their military power in less than a week. Summon the small council and have my son sent here as well. Cersei said, defeated. Varys bowed and left. Tyrion rose to leave but was stopped by Cersei. If I am going to convince Joffrey to make this trade, I need you here. She said blankly. Tyrion had never been so flawed in his life. His sister needed him to convince the king. However, he was unsure if he could ever manage it. Later that night, when the small council and Boy King had been summoned, Joffrey was seething. I will not make such a trade. Joffrey said in front of the small council. Your Grace, this is a fair and equal trade. The Grand Maester advised, stuttering through his sentence. I would have to agree. Janos Slynt, a newly appointed member, seemed all too happy to make peace now despite his hand in the betrayal of Ned Stark. Please nephew, we need to placate the North and focus on other threats to your reign. Tyrion said, his tone urgent. You are talking to a king, imp, you will address me as such. Joffrey said, way off topic for the matter at hand. Joffrey, we will never have another chance to make this happen. Cersei said, almost begging. She had not called the army of the Crown Lands yet because she did not trust them to come to her aid, but now, she was wishing that she had, as she could have sent them to aid her father. Now, she was paying the price for her misstep. Eddard Stark tried to steal my crown. Even if we release him, he will keep calling my reign illegitimate and he will continue to insult me. Joffrey said, nearly spitting. Tyrion had to hand it to Joffrey, he was correct. Ned would keep calling Joffrey a bastard even after he was released. However, the king's words did not come from wisdom but anger. It would still be safer to trade, as even if Lord Stark did keep calling Joffrey illegitimate, he had no evidence for it. Many of the lords attacking them now fought because they wanted to free Lord Stark. If they did that, it is likely that the Reach, Riverlands, and Vale would return home, considering the mission accomplished. Joffrey would be considered a weak king for folding, but he would still be king. If the North challenged them alone, there would be the possibility for victory, but as long as the Northern Alliance was united against them with Robb Stark at its head, there would be no victory. I forbid it. Joffrey said, knocking Tyrion out of his thoughts. Here and now I declare as king that no trade will be made between us and our enemies. If Eddard Stark is traded without my consent, or if he suddenly escapes, everyone in this room will lose their heads. Including you, mother. Joffrey said with rage in his eyes before turning and leaving them. The small councillors looked at one another, realizing their situation. Varys and Tyrion locked eyes. Varys had been speaking with Lord Stark, and now it was Tyrion's turn to try and convince him to fold. Later that same night, Tyrion and Varys made their way to Lord Stark's black cell. As they walked down the steps lit only by their torches, Varys spoke. I tried lying to him. The spider said as they turned a corner. I told him we had his children and that if he took the black, they would be allowed to leave. Varys finished. And? Tyrion asked. He asked to see them, and when I told him that wouldn't be possible, he laughed at me and called me a liar. Varys said, almost sounding offended. He knows we don't have them, and he is going to know when we walk in there again that Robb is winning. We need to be honest with him. All we can do is hope that he will wish to avert bloodshed. That is our only hope. Tyrion said, skeptical of even his own plan. They opened the cell door and found Eddard Stark covering his eyes because of the light. Who is there? Ned asked calmly. Tyrion knelt down and Varys continued to stand. Ah, Lord Tyrion. Eddard said as Tyrion handed him a new pouch of water replacing the one Varys had brought him a number of days ago. How fares the war? Eddard asked almost jokingly. Ned knew already that they must be desperate if they were down here. Varys had already informed him on his second visit to Lord Stark that Jaime Lannister had been captured. Your son crushed my father at the Ruby Ford. He crippled the Lannister army. Tyrion said flatly, and Eddard's eyes widened. Lord Stark had not expected that. Seems my son has put you in a bind. No army to defend yourself, and he holds the Kingslayer hostage. Have Stannis and Renly come knocking yet? Eddard said mockingly at the dwarf. Tyrion did not react. We need to stop this. Too many men have died already, Lord Stark. Your son is a capable warrior, but in one battle he could lose it all. Are you willing to sacrifice thousands and possibly your son for the sake of a dead king? Tyrion asked. Tyrion knew what he was doing was wrong. Lord Stark wanted justice and it felt wrong to trivialize it, but the Lannisters needed peace. No, Lord Stark said, looking forward. Tyrion's eyes widened. It could not have been that easy, and he quickly found out it was not. Just one life, Lord Tyrion. Lord Stark said, looking straight forward, unwavering. Tyrion hung his head. Ned Stark would not budge. Please, Lord Stark. Varys began. The realm bleeds and you have the power to stop it. I told you I am a servant of the realm and I do not wish to see it suffer anymore. Varys genuinely begged. You know, I have no idea if you are lying or not. Ned spat. When you told me you had my children, I genuinely did not know if you were telling the truth, so I called your bluff. You blinked first. But still, even now I have no idea who you serve, Lord Varys. Lord Stark paused. You told me you grew up with actors. You learned their craft and you learned it well. But I grew up with soldiers. I learned how to die a long time ago. Lord Stark took a short breath as he calmly said all of this. I demand to be tried by the king. Lord Stark said, to the shock of both men. Ned knew now more than ever was his best chance to make it out alive. It did not matter if he was tried and found guilty, he needed to tell the royal court what he knew so the word would spread. If the Lannisters had any sense, they would spare him and send him back to his cell. If they killed him, Robb was likely to kill Jaime Lannister and break the Lannisters. Ned knew that Tyrion was a good man and would communicate his demand for a trial to the Queen, and she would see a chance to publicly humiliate Eddard and bite. If he was denied a trial, it was likely such a demand would not be kept secret in the Red Keep, and such a denial would incense the court against the king. The denial of a High Lord his trial would be seen as an obscene injustice. But he also knew that what he would say to the court would enrage the king, and the Mad Boy was likely to kill him. Eddard Stark prepared for death. He thought of his family, his wife, his children, and the future grandchild he may never meet. Tyrion and Varys left, and Lord Stark prayed. When he finished, he whispered in the darkness, "I am sorry, Cat, I do not think I will be making it home." Eddard was right about the Queen. She bit hard at his play for a public trial. She convinced her son that giving Eddard a trial could placate the lords of the court and possibly turn other lords against the Starks, winning them new allies. She told him that if he demanded trial by combat, the Hound would defeat him without killing him. In the event that he didn't, she would allow Petyr Baelish to simply weave his way through Lord Stark's defense and find him guilty. Lord Stark was led into the throne room where the court and king waited. He was chained and had not washed in gods know how long, but he stood tall and proud. "Lord Eddard Stark, you stand accused of treason in the sight of gods and men." Grand Maester Pycelle said loudly, the lords of the court looking on. "What do you have to say in your defense?" He finished, the eyes of the court on him. Lord Stark noted that the only lords that remained were a few Storm Lords and some lords from the Crown Lands and Westerlands. The only ones guilty of that crime are the Lannisters. Ned spat, gearing up for what was not a defense of himself but an attack on the king. "Joffrey Baratheon is as much a Baratheon as I am. He is born of incest between the Kingslayer and the Queen. He is a bastard and an abomination." Ned's words were harsh but true. The court gasped and whispered to one another at his words. It became very clear to Cersei that this was a bad idea, and Tyrion stood there realizing Lord Stark had played him to get in front of the court. Cersei and Jaime Lannister ordered the killings of Jon Arryn because he knew the truth. There had been rumors of this ever since the imprisonment of Lysa Arryn. The Crown had denied these accusations, but now Eddard Stark made them plain to the world. "Then when I told the Queen, I knew and intended to tell the King she had Lancel Lannister give the King strong wine, causing him to be killed by a boar," Eddard said in a level tone, making sure not to sound mad. But his next words were filled with anger. "You." His chained hands pointed at the Queen. "Killed my best friend and my king, and a man I looked to as a father, all because you wanted your bastard of a son to sit on the Iron Throne. You dishonor your house and this court. And you, Joffrey, I would have killed you with my bare hands before I would have ever let you marry my Sansa." Ned paused and pointed at the king, now rage and fury that even Robert Baratheon would have been proud of dancing in his eyes. "Winter is coming, Joffrey. And it will come for you first," Lord Stark said before actually spitting in the direction of the king. The court was in awe at the force of nature in front of them, but they were not silent for long as the king screamed from atop the Iron Throne, "Sir Eileen, bring me his head." The court flew into fury as lords demanded a stop to this. No rebuttal had been made by the king to the accusations, and many recognized this was not justice. There had been no true trial, and Tyrion realized this was the worst possible scenario. "Joffrey, no!" Tyrion screamed, and Cersei began climbing the Iron Throne as Sir Eileen pulled ice from its scabbard. Tyrion looked for anyone to stop this madness. The only man who would have been bold enough was Sir Barristan Selmy, and he had been dismissed several days ago. Tyrion saw Stormlords screaming for an end to this madness, and some simply began to leave, already convinced by Lord Stark's words. Beric Dondarrion looked to be trying to convince other lords to draw swords, but it was taking too long to convince other lords. "This is madness," Varys said to Tyrion as Cersei was in tears begging the king to stop, but all he did was smile at the sight below him. "Joffrey, stop this now," Tyrion said, about to climb the Iron Throne himself when he saw the sword swing from the corner of his eye. "No!" Tyrion screamed, seeing the sword connect with flesh. Everything stopped as ladies screamed and fainted, and lords yelled and cursed. The Storm Lords began leaving very quickly, along with the houses sworn to Dragonstone, as Tyrion looked up to the top of the throne to see Joffrey smiling and Cersei looking down at Tyrion in horror. Joffrey had just sealed their fate. Notes. So, as I imagine for many of you, this chapter does not come as a surprise. I know many of you wanted to see Ned live, and believe me, I did too. But if you have caught on, I have tried to follow a simple rule of what are the logical consequences of a particular action. In this story I have to ask the question, what would change if the Reach was involved with the North? In this case, Ned sealed his fate the moment he tells Cersei he knows. Because once Joffrey gets his hands on Ned, it's over. but I hope you all understand that Ned's sacrifice is for the purpose of bringing the hammer down on the Lannisters, and that instead of his death being the culmination of sad circumstances, it is the last breath of an alpha wolf meant to enrage the pack against his enemy. With that said, I hope everyone enjoyed the direction I took with his death. He was able to set many lords against Joffrey when he was allowed to speak publicly. I know it seems like a slip-up that Cersei and Tyrion would not have normally made in this circumstance, but my thinking on it was that they are lions backed into a corner. They are looking for a way out and didn't realize that Lord Stark would do what he did. I also hope you enjoyed the final rage that is Eddard Stark. Tried to have a cathartic moment there with him flipping his shit at Joffrey, lol. The next chapter should already be up, so enjoy. Chapter 27, The King in the North. Notes. It's about to go down. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Robb had screamed and yelled. He cracked stone and bent steel. When word reached them of his father's death, Theon had held Robb and Jon as they wept. 3 men, 3 brothers had lost their father. The Lannister prisoners in Harrenhal that night were kept up by the sound of howling wolves raging for vengeance. In Riverrun, Lady Catelyn collapsed, and her children screamed for their father. Edmure Tully was at a loss for what to do, and Brynden Blackfish Tully in all his years of war had never seen such sorrow as the tears that fell from his niece's eyes that night. When word reached Winterfell, Lady Margaery had been too stunned to move. She wept and cursed Joffrey, but pulled herself together both for the health of her baby and to be ready for what came next. She cried with and held Rickon as he screamed. Maester Lewyn was helpful, but Margaery was the only one Rickon felt he could turn to. The day after finding out, Robb and most of his commanders, including the Lords of the Vale, rode for Riverrun. The Riverlords were reclaiming their lands, and the army of the Vale would meet them at Riverrun. There was nothing for them in the capital to save now. They would muster together at Riverrun to decide what was to be done next. The Lords of the North, the Trident, the Reach, and the Vale gathered in Riverrun to decide their next step. Many Lords of the Reach had joined Garland's force to seek glory in the outset of the war. Now they saw the sorrow and rage of the North. It was important that they were there, though. The Lords in Riverrun were going to decide who to support in the wars to come. Renly and Stannis had both declared themselves king. Stannis declared by right and Renly declared by fitness for the throne. The choice really only seemed to be between the 2 Baratheon brothers. Robb and Jon had wept with the other Starks, but now they needed to steel themselves. They knelt in the Godswood at Riverrun with the other lords who followed the old gods to pray for the soul of Lord Eddard. Robb rose first and made his way to Riverrun's hall where the lords had gathered. His eyes were dark, and a spirit of vengeance walked with him. The hall at Riverrun had been cleared of tables, and many chairs had been arranged into a large square, with each side of the square being designated for one of the 4 regions present at the council. Robb would sit in the center of the Northern Lords, Edmure would represent the Riverlords, Yohn Royce the Valuman, and Garland the Lords of the Reach. Edmure Tully would lead the meeting in its discussion as he filled in for the Lord of the Castle, his father, but all knew who the leader of the alliance truly was. Robb Stark entered, and every lord and knight in the large hall stood. He had won 4 resounding victories in short succession. He had captured Jaime Lannister, crushed Tywin Lannister, and killed the Mountain in single combat. The boy was dead, and the Lord of Winterfell had been born. Robb took his seat among his lords and the meeting began. His mother sat near Robb, and Jon and Theon stood in the back. My lords, we come here tonight mourning the loss of Eddard Stark. However, we need to decide what our next course of action is. Edmure paused. Every lord has a right to speak, and every lord has a right to be heard. I open the floor for discussion. Loras Tyrell had already informed the lords present of Joffrey's nature. All came to quick agreement. Even if the boy was not born of incest and a bastard, they would not have followed him. The debate raged. The Reach was for Renly while the North was for Stannis. The Riverlords and Valyman were split down the middle on the issue. Some had presented the idea of Gendry as a compromise, but this was stuck down as few wished to be ruled by a bastard blacksmith. The alliance was fraying as predicted. Stephen Free wanted to return home and let Stannis and Renly fight it out and then support the winner. He was chastised as a coward by most of the lords present and never spoke again. Lord Bracken took to supporting whatever Lord Blackwood would not, and Lords Houghton and Corbray almost got into a fight. Robb Stark, the new Lord of Winterfell, took this time to speak. When he stood, the room was silent. "My lords, let us take a break for a few moments. Have bread and water brought to all those present, and let us take a few minutes to cool our heads. Do not drink wine or ale. We have a long night ahead of us," Robb said calmly but with command beyond his 15 years. The lords agreed and they left the hall, leaving Robb, Catelyn, Loras, Jon, Garlan, Theon, and Ed Muir. "I am afraid the alliance is going to break if we do not come to an agreement tonight," Robb said firmly. "The lords will begin taking their men in different directions in the morning, and we will begin meeting them on the battlefield as enemies if we do not come to an agreement," Robb finished. "You need to speak your mind, Robb, and tell them what you think. They will follow you," Catelyn said to her son. "I would if I knew which choice was right. Neither would make a good king. The lords of the Reach are right. Stannis commands no love and has no mercy. The lords of the North are also right. Renly has no right to it, and while he plays good at being a ruler, it takes more than charming words to make one," Robb said despairingly. Jon spoke up next. "Robb, whatever choice you make, many if not all of these lords will follow you. I know we only found out a few days ago about father, but you need to set that aside and choose now." Jon spoke truly, but Loras could not help but be thrown back to his conversation with Eddard Stark. Perhaps he does not have to choose, Loras thought to himself as lords came back into the hall. Loras came to his conclusion. He would not tell it to Robb in fear of being stopped by him, but he knew what he needed to do. When Ed Muir brought the lords back to order, Loras rose slowly. "My lords, before we continue, I beg your leave to speak to you of my last conversation with Lord Stark. If I am correct, I was the last of any man here to speak with him, and I wish to convey to you his message to me." The lords grew silent at Loras' words, and Robb nodded his head in approval. "Lord Stark and I spoke about who might be king if not Joffrey. He and I had the same debate we are having now. Stannis had the right, but Renly seems to be a better choice." Loras paused. "I had believed, as many of my fellow knights and lords of the Reach do, that Renly would be a better choice. However, Lord Stark convinced me that this was not the case, that when the blood began to spill, Renly would fail us." Those in favor of Renly erupted in fury, yelling at Loras, only to be silenced by Robb. "He is not finished speaking, and you will give him the same respect as you have given one another." Robb's voice boomed, and those lords that had stood went silent and sat before the young wolf. "However, my countrymen are right in pointing out that Stannis could bleed the country dry because of his lack of mercy. It does not help he is taking counsel from a Red Priestess," Loras said, preparing to make a suggestion that could have him thrown out of the hall or worse. Even with charisma such as Loras had, this might be a step too far for some of the lords, but he had to follow his heart. "My lords, Stannis has the right, but we fear what he would do as king. Renly has the charisma, but we worry he may not be strong enough as king. This was the very same problem that Lord Stark and I came to." Loras paused and breathed. "He told me that if he were to be betrayed and killed, we would have the power to name our own king, just as he did in Robert's rebellion. I can speak only for myself, but I have made my choice." Loras drew his sword at this point and turned and pointed it at Robb. "Robb Stark has proven in the last month that he is more of a king than any other man in Westeros. Lord Stark told me he trusted the future of his family and the North to Robb Stark. He does not have a claim to the Iron Throne, but he is my king from this day until his last day." Loras finished kneeling before Robb, his sword in the ground. Robb stood slowly, looking the knight kneeling in front of him. He expected Loras to be laughed out of the hall, only for the Great Jon to stand. "Then let them keep the Iron Throne. The blood of the kings of winter runs through his veins. It was the dragons we bowed to, and now the dragons are dead." The Great Jon bellowed as he drew his sword. "There sits the only king I mean to bend my knee to. The king in the North." The Great Jon yelled as he kneeled for Robb. Ed Muir was the next to stand. "I have been charged to speak for my father in the matters of this council. You are my blood, Robb. You saved the River Lords and you defeated the Lion. You are the only worthy king of the Trident," Ed Muir said, drawing his sword and kneeling. At this point many lords began standing up, watching in awe of what was happening. Garland Tyrell came forward next. After receiving nods from the other lords of the Reach, he walked in front of Robb. "Robb, I consider you my brother. You are wise beyond your years, and while you may be my brother by law, you are the only king worthy of the name. I would name you the King of the Reach. Garland said, kneeling his sword in the ground. Rob was in awe and did not know what to say as Yohn Royce came to him. You are our Lord's cousin, and I have been given authority to speak on his behalf. Yohn Royce said, drawing his sword. You may be young, but you are the king we turn to lead us into battle. Now I charge you to lead us once again as the King of the Vale. There it was, every lord in the hall was ready to bow to him as king. Each had chosen him. His mother looked on in pride as Jon slowly approached Rob. Am I your brother, now and always? Jon asked loud enough for the whole hall to hear. Now and always, Rob said, near the breaking point of what he could handle. Jon drew his sword and knelt with the other lords and laurers. My sword is yours, in victory and defeat, from this day until my last day. Jon said the last part with emotion as the great Yohn yelled as if to tell all of Westeros. The king in the north. He yelled, and he was followed by every lord in the hall drawing swords and kneeling, leaving only Rob standing. The king in the north. The king in the north. The king in the north. Notes. So I hope you like this one. I took a lot of inspiration from the show here, and I hope it shows. This was when the show was actually really in a good spot. Many of the lines of declaration are either word for word from the show or slightly changed. Rob's declaration as king in the show is in my top 10 favorite moments from GOT, so I wanted to make it kind of similar. With that said, you can tell I repurposed Theon's line from the show for Jon just because it felt more right for him to say it than Theon. Also, there is a line I threw in just before I posted this. I added, in a spirit of vengeance walked with him. Now what I am about to say ends up playing almost no role in the rest of the story, at least in this part, but that was meant to signify that an old god of vengeance now walks with Rob, giving him strength and power to accomplish his goals. Again, it will not play a part in the rest of this part of the story, and I don't think I will add anything more into the later parts, but in my mind it just shows the gods are with Rob. You may also see a dark /mean streak in Rob, but not a tyrannical or despotic one. There is a point to this vengeful side, and it will resolve itself. Don't be worried about it, because it will not cause Rob to make shitty decisions or ruin his noble /just characteristics. Just make him a little bit more badass, lol. Hope you all enjoyed. Chapter 28, A Queen, a Princess, and a Conqueror. Notes. Hope you guys enjoy this chapter. Some fun stuff that I am excited about in this chapter. As always, there are some behind-the-scenes notes at the end. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. My dearest Margaery. It feels as though it has been a lifetime since I have had to write you a letter. I hope this letter finds you and our baby well. I am sorry I have not been there for you through all of this. I promise that I will return to you as soon as I am able. I also write this to you to tell you of some developments here in the south. My love, I have been crowned king in the north, the Trident, the Reach, and the Vale. I do not believe I need to tell you what that means for you. I am sorry that I am not there to place the crown on you myself, but please instruct one to be made for you. My grandfather has already begun the making of my own. By the time you read this, my siblings will be making their way north to you. I will continue to dream of you every night. I swear I will return to you, my love, and we can raise our child in peace. Just wait for me a little longer. With all my love. Your Rob. Margaery had reached the end of the letter and was shaking. Maester Luwin came kneeling in front of her, worried. My lady, what is wrong? He asked. I need a crown. She said with a smile, handing the old man the letter with a smile that was both happy and fearful. She had been the Lady of Winterfell, and now she was to be Queen of 4 Kingdoms. Margaery had handled the North and Winterfell's lands while most of the Starks were away. She even comforted Rickon. He yearned for his mother and father, and his temperamental nature sometimes caused him and Shaggydoag to lash out. Shaggydoag would snap at Margaery but would never hurt her. Now she needed to tell Rickon he was a prince. She felt this was her preparation for having a child. Margaery knew in her heart it was a boy. If her baby was a prince, there was only one name he could have. Eddard. Rob had been named king the night before and had written his letter to Margaery before sleep finally came to him. He ate breakfast with his lords in the hall that morning. They were going to prepare for their next move together after they ate, but for now Rob enjoyed his breakfast. Until a certain fierce she-wolf came howling into the hall. Arya. Sansa could be heard yelling, chasing after her sister as Bran tried to keep up with the two. They were followed by 3 direwolves. Rob's attention was on the furious girl in front of him, and he was actually slightly scared as she began yelling. "Why is everyone calling me princess?" Arya yelled to Rob and his mother. "I wake up this morning and everyone thinks it's a funny joke to call me a princess." "Well, it's not funny," she said, now close to Rob. "Was this your idea, Rob?" she said, accusing him. Rob smiled. He was going to enjoy this. "No, it was actually Sir Laura's idea," Rob said, hearing a fork drop to his left where Laura's Tyrell sat. Arya bolted towards Laura's, screaming loudly at him. The hall burst into laughter as Arya went running at Laura's, only to be intercepted by Jon, who picked her up and brought her back to where Rob was. "Did you really not tell them?" Rob asked his mother. "They were asleep last night when I returned and asleep this morning when I rose." His mother chuckled in response. "Will someone please tell my sister why she is being called a princess?" Rob said exasperatedly. None of the lords seemed to want to face the little she-wolf, so Jon finally spoke up. "Last night we crowned Rob king in the north, the Trident, the Reach, and the Vale. By definition that makes me, Bran, and Rickon princes, you and Sansa princesses, and Margaery queen," Jon said, looking down at Arya, who was taking this all in. Jon had attempted to argue that he was not a prince, only for Rob to refuse and state he would not argue about the subject. Jon was a Stark and therefore a prince. He was last in line, treated like a cousin in the succession of Rob's crown, but a prince, nonetheless. "I know this is a lot to take in right now, and I want you to know I will answer all of your questions," Rob said as he walked up and kneeled in front of his siblings. "I need you to be strong and take care of Margaery for me while I am away down here in the south. Bran, until my child is born you are the Prince of Winterfell and therefore my heir. When Margaery gives birth to my child, he or she will be my heir. The succession will follow our old ways, meaning a daughter can inherit before a brother but not before a son," Rob said, looking at them. "But I need all of you safe while I finish this war down here in the south. So, I am sending you home to Winterfell." Rob finished waiting to me ambushed with questions. "Why do you have to stay here?" Bran asked sadly. "If I go north now, we will never be safe from the Lannisters. I want to avenge our father and bring his killers to justice," Rob said with conviction. Sansa spoke up next. "Will Mother come with us?" "Soon, but I need her to stay here for now. I may need to send her somewhere, but just know that you are princes and princesses of the winter. You are strong, and when you speak people will listen. Remember what Father told us. The lone wolf dies but the pack survives. You have each other just as I have Jon and Theon," he said, standing. His siblings hugged him, and their mother came over and hugged them as well before sending them away. Breakfast came to a close in the hall after that, and then Rob met with his lords now away from the hall. These would be his field commanders, and it was time to tell them his plan. "My lords, you named me your king knowing full well I had no claim to the Iron Throne. I still do not intend to sit the mangled thing, but I do not intend to allow us to be slowly destroyed by the Lannisters," Rob said, standing over a map of Westeros. "I also want my vengeance," Rob said, and many of the lords nodded their heads in agreement. "To that end, I want to secure one more kingdom. One that we will need to make sure that we remain safe." He pointed to Casterly Rock on the map. "We need to conquer the Westerlands. If we do, we will break Lannister power in Westeros, leaving them open to being destroyed by the Baratheons," Rob said, now pointing to King's Landing. "Your Grace, I thought we wanted Joffrey's head. Why not march on King's Landing now?" Lord Bracken spoke up. He was unsure if he was going to get used to being called Your Grace. "If we leave the rock unchallenged, we risk being outflanked. We know that Tywin's army is broken, and the Crown Lands are slowly mustering their forces, but our scouts report that Renly has raised a force of 30,000 at Storm's End and Stannis another 5,000 on Dragonstone. I expect that they will move to challenge the capital in some way soon," Rob said, pausing. "Regardless of if they unite or not, they will keep Tywin's forces busy, leaving the Westerlands open to us." The Northern Lords began to smile. The wolf would attack the lion's back while the stag charged it head-on. If we attack King's Landing now, we risk fighting the Baratheons, who will not have taken kindly to my crowning as a rival king. Although I intend to mitigate this," Robb said before continuing. "Tywin Lannister would let us kill each other before attacking us one by one. While we would be fighting Renly and Stannis, Tywin would muster new armies in the Westerlands uncontested. Lord Bracken, while I do want direct vengeance against Joffrey, I will not do so by sacrificing my kingdom." Robb finished, and the lords looked incredibly impressed. He could have thrown himself headlong into the lion's jaws, but instead he made the smarter move. "You said you have an idea of how to placate the Baratheons while we take the Westerlands. What does that entail, Your Grace?" Lord Bolton asked politely. "I intend to send an emissary to Renly Baratheon to form an alliance. My terms will be simple. I will give him 40,000 more soldiers and a navy to attack King's Landing with while we conquer the Westerlands. In return, when the war is over, he and I can be allies. Between he and Stannis, Renly is easier to work with. I know him and I trust him. He also has the larger force between the Baratheon brothers." Robb finished, and Lord Bolton seemed to agree with this plan. "And if he refuses, Your Grace? He could attack our rear," Lord Lionel Corbray pointed out. "Not likely. Renly has barely enough soldiers to take King's Landing without our help, and Stannis does not have enough soldiers to take Duskendale, let alone the capital. They would likely not risk attacking us while we have the numbers advantage. They would risk losing their armies or becoming so weak that attacking King's Landing, for them, would be out of the question. No, Tywin Lannister will be their first target. But in the event that Tywin, Renly or Stannis attack, the Riverlords will have their army of 20,000 to guard the King's Road near Harrenhal, and I am going to send word to Mace Tyrell to move 20,000 troops to Bitterbridge. These will be the same forces that I give to Renly if he wishes to help us. The force at Bitterbridge will also defend against an attack from the Dornish, which is unlikely considering their history with House Lannister." Robb finished, finally getting to his plan for the Westerlands. "We will attack from the north with the armies of the North, Reach, and Vale. A force of 80,000, while the rest of the army of the Reach numbering 40,000 will be led by Mace Tyrell and Randil Tarly from Highgarden and attack the Westerlands from the south. The Redwyne fleet will leave from Seaguard to blockade Lannisport immediately, and the Sunset Sea fleet will remain north of Cape Kraken in the event the Ironborn get cheeky," Robb said, looking to Theon. "I apologize, Theon, and I mean no offense, but I cannot risk a force I can't control having access to our rear uncontested, even if you are here fighting with me. I trust you with my life, but I don't know your father," Robb said, hopefully not making Theon mad. "No offense taken, Your Grace. It is the wiser strategy," Theon said, not taking offense. This was war, and Robb was not going to risk the Iron Islands attacking his rear. He also was not going to send Theon to the Iron Islands to negotiate either. He couldn't afford to lose Balon's one good reason not to attack the north. Ironborn neutrality was enough for now. Robb began assembling his forces, and his siblings prepared to leave. A few days after laying out their war plans, a new face arrived at Riverrun looking for Robb. He was brought before the now crowned king in the main hall at Riverrun. Robb looking down at the man in front of him. Robb wore his new crown, a thick iron circle with 9 iron points like swords, made to look like the ancient crown of winter. "Sir Barristan, I did not think you would come here," Robb said, looking down at the former Lord Commander to Robert Baratheon's Kingsguard. "This was the only place I would want to come, Your Grace," Barristan began. "Your Grace, I apologize for what happened to your father. Had I been there, I would have done what I could to stop his murder from happening. I am truly sorry," Barristan said, beginning to kneel. "Your apology is unwarranted, Sir Barristan. You are a man of honor, and my father held you in the highest regard," Robb said to his childhood hero. "Your Grace, I have served 3 kings. Jaehaerys reigned for 3 good years and then died. I then served Aerys, a man who burned people alive for fun. Then I served Robert. A good man, a great warrior, but a terrible king. I want to serve a king who I believe in. I have had the opportunity to train with you and see you grow. It would be the greatest honor of my life to serve on your Kingsguard." Barristan finished, still kneeling. Robb was awestruck and honored, but there was one problem. "Sir Barristan, your offer is honorable. However, I have no formal Kingsguard. I have a battle guard who fight alongside me and protect me during battle, but they swear no oaths. Robb said politely. But perhaps you should have a Kingsguard. Lady Catelyn spoke up now. A group of warriors loyal to you, to guard you and your family day and night. The Lannisters may try to kill you somewhere other than the battlefield, and it is important that you are protected. Catelyn advised, and it made sense. Very well. Give Sir Barristan a sword. Robb said, standing. Barristan was given a sword and unsheathed it, laying it at Robb's feet. Sir Barristan, do you swear to guard your king to the best of your ability, to keep his secrets and advise him when your counsel is requested and withhold it when it is not, to take no wife, father no children, and hold no lands, to watch and protect dutifully until death releases you? Do you swear all these things in the sight of gods and men? Robb said, making up an oath on his own, taking pieces of the old Kingsguard oath and Night's Watch vows. I swear it, your grace, in the sight of gods and men. Sir Barristan said with pride. Then arise, Sir Barristan. The Lord Commander of the Wolfsguard. Robb said, deciding on the fly to change the name of the organization to differentiate it from Joffrey's Kingsguard. There was clapping in the hall and Robb quieted them down. I wish to name a few more members so I do not work Sir Barristan into an early grave. Robb chuckled. Loras Tyrell, Ciri O'Forrell, Robar Royce, Abadal Strongbeard, and Gendry, come forward. Each of you has demonstrated to me that you are willing to stand with me and fight by my side in battle. You all rode with me at the Ruby Ford and climbed the walls of Harrenhal with me and survived. Some of you are knights, another a former First Sword to the Sea Lord of Braavos, another a clan champion, and another a blacksmith so strong he killed 24 gold cloaks with a log. I would name each one of you to my Wolfsguard. Robb said before swearing them all to his Wolfsguard under Barristan Selmy. These men would guard the king day and night and would do so with pride. Robb's force prepared to march after receiving word from Mace Tyrell of his intention to begin marching into the Westerlands. Finally, Robb was going to bring his vengeance to the Lannisters' own home. He would be taking the Kingslayer with him. A lion tamed by a wolf. A hostage kept alive only by the leave of a king. Notes. I enjoyed having Arya just be royally pissed, pun intended, at the beginning of the chapter. I just sort of imagined her the day after the declaration for Robb that she would be walking around Riverrun being called princess, just being like, the hells is this, lol. I also thought it would be fun for Robb to throw Loras under the bus for all of it, lol. Wanted to lay out the war plan for everyone, and I also wanted to give you all an army composition that I have been using in my notes. So here it is. North, 30,000. Reach, 80,000. Vale, 30,000. Riverlands, 20,000. Crown lands, 20,000, would be 25,000, but the Dragonstone houses are with Stannis. Westerlands, 35,000, with the ability to bring up 10,000 from new levies and sellswords. Now ineffective after the battles. Stormlands, 30,000. Dawn, 30,000. Dragonstone houses, 5,000. Iron Islands, 15,000. Some of the numbers I had to extrapolate based on actual army numbers that were put forth in the story, and some came from things GRM has said and some came from known population of a kingdom. I tried to stay book accurate. Like, I know 300 years ago the North could muster 30,000, so that's the number I went with for maximum power from the North. Probably could be more, but I wasn't going to take that leap without hard knowledge. Now Barristan. Some of you are seeing the major butterflies that him being with Robb means, and I will say this, just wait and see what happens. Don't jump the gun on any assumptions. Also, some of you probably wonder why Robb and not Dany. In this case it is actually because Barristan got to know Robb, and that is why he chose Robb instead of Dany. It was important that he know Robb and trusted that he would in fact be a good king. The other members of the Wolfsguard I am sure make sense except for maybe one. I chose the name Wolfsguard because this is a kingdom that is headed by a Northman, so it kinda needs to reflect that. I also have a vague memory of reading this name for a guard in another fic and absolutely loved it. I'm sure you can tell that there are some that are not knights. This is because Northmen don't put as high a value on knights. Some of you are probably wondering also why members of Robb's battle guard from the books are not on the Wolfsguard. That is because many of the members of the guard are either 1, heirs to their houses like Daisy Mormont, or 2, individuals of no special skill that just didn't feel like they belonged when I have people like Loras and Sirio available on hand. Now let's address Gendry. Yes, he is a blacksmith, but I tried my best to buff his strength by having him kill 24 dudes with literally just a log. So really I wanted him on there because he does eventually become a super capable fighter. There are only 6 guards, so that means 1 more is on the way. I wonder who it will be. Now some of you probably wonder why Jon isn't on the guard, and that is because I have other plans for Jon that don't involve him being on the Wolf's Guard. Winking smiley. Hope you all enjoyed. Chapter 29, The Old Lion and the Young Wolf. Notes. Enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Tywin Lannister ascended the steps of the Red Keep to no great pomp or circumstance. He arrived at night ahead of his last 10,000 men and made his way to the small council chambers immediately. He had been named Hand of the King but would waste no time with ceremony. There was work to be done. He had been crushed by the young wolf. At first, he thought the Stark plan was to lure his army into the Bloody Gate by harrying his supply lines and camp at the Ruby Ford. The hit-and-run attacks from the Vale had become so intense that he would lose his force if he did not pursue. Tywin had thought the Knights of the Vale meant to damage him enough so that when Robb Stark linked up with them, he would be able to punch through the ford. His strategy to deal with this was force the men of the Vale to retreat before Robb Stark could cross the ford. This would buy time for Jaime to take Riverrun and then reinforce Tywin. Tywin had marched beyond the ford and then realized the army of the Vale had taken stronger positions in the hills approaching the Bloody Gate. The prudent decision was to fall back to the ford and summon Jaime's host to him. Jaime should have been able to assault Riverrun by that point, but he had not received a messenger from Jaime in some time. That was when the Knights of the Vale attacked him as his force crossed back over the ford. The Lannister army had been marching across the waters of the ford when 30,000 soldiers charged at them hard from the north. Tywin and his brother Kevan ordered ranks be formed by the men in the water to cover the retreat of Lannister forces across the ford. They could better defend themselves from the opposite bank. However, the attack caused chaos and orders were lost or men were simply unable to follow them due to the chaos. The Lannister soldiers were engaged in the water and Tywin could not draw them back no matter how many war horns were blown, no matter how many orders he and Kevan gave. That was when a new horn blast was heard. From the west the Stark, Tully, and Tyrell banners snapped in the wind as 10,000 horsemen charged down at Tywin's flank. He tried to move a detachment of spearmen to his flank, but the battle was too chaotic. The orders never reached the men and when the cavalry hit his flanks his army buckled. He had to retreat. In Harrenhal, Tywin learned half of his army had been destroyed and Jaime's force had been annihilated. His son had also been captured and now their army was crippled. Tywin immediately sent word to the Westerlands ordering his cousin Stafford to begin raising as many soldiers as possible. However, Tywin knew he could not stay in Harrenhal. There were 40,000 soldiers bearing down on him and he could not defend the ruin that was Harrenhal. He also would receive no aid from the Crown Land armies. For reasons that escaped Tywin, the army of the Crown Lands had not been mustered. He was alone and exposed and so began his march back to the capital, leaving the mountain and 500 men to slow Robb Stark's pursuit. Tywin later received news that Robb Stark had killed the mountain and overrun Harrenhal not 2 days after he had left. As he marched, a rider brought news of Lord Stark's execution. Tywin had thought that the words might have well been that his son had been executed. Tywin expected Robb Stark to take Jaime's head after the death of Lord Stark. Their opportunity for a favorable peace had disappeared in an instant and Tywin knew there was cleaning up he would have to do. Tywin entered the small council chambers and the lords stood along with his daughter the Queen Regent. The hour was late, but Tywin would not sleep until he had a handle on the situation. "My lord, so good of you to arrive safely in the capital." Grand Maester Pycelle had begun only to be cut off by Tywin. "Sit, we do not have time for pleasantries," Tywin said, his baritone voice carrying in the hall as he sat down, the other lords joining him. He had not greeted anyone on his way in and he did not intend to be greeted himself. "Lord Varys, what have you heard of our enemy's movements?" Tywin asked sternly. He needed as much information as he could get before giving orders and making decisions. Varys breathed before he gave his answer. He had heard much from his little birds and none of it was good. Renly Baratheon has raised 30,000 at Storm's End and declared himself king there. Stannis has gathered to him the Dragonstone houses but only has 5,000 men. However, my birds tell me that he has most of the royal fleet with him. Varys paused. This next song was even worse than the others. Robb Stark has been declared king in the north, the Trident, the Reach, and the Vale and is rearming his army at Riverrun. His alliance did not fray as we had hoped it would. My birds tell me he has ordered your son not be harmed. I expect he intends to keep him alive to use as a bargaining chip, although his lords seem rather against the idea of letting Sir Jaime live. It appears Sir Jaime is only alive because Robb Stark allows him to live. The Riverlords have retaken their lands. Mace Tyrell is marshalling a force of 40,000 at Highgarden and has sent 20,000 to Bitterbridge. The Ironborn do not seem to wish to engage Robb Stark and there is no movement in Dorne. The Spider finished solemnly. What of the army of the Crown Lands? Tywine asked his daughter, but Janos Slynt answered. Mustering, my lord, on your orders. But some of the lords are taking their time. Many of them seem reluctant to bring their armies to bear. Slynt finished. This was obviously due to many of them having been at court when Eddard Stark was executed. Grand Maester. Send word to these late lords and tell them they must pick up the pace of their marshalling or my army will do it for them. Tywine said as the old man bowed his head. Robb Stark will move his army to attack the Westerlands next. There is nothing for him here in the capital. Tywine said, and he almost detected relief on his daughter's face. It did not last. He will look to crush our power base, cut off our supplies, and allow the Baratheons to have their way. Tywine finished, his daughter not nearly as happy now. Robb Stark may be young, but he is a natural commander. But even natural commandability cannot make up for the difficulties he will face getting into the Westerlands. The Golden Tooth will shave off much of his strength. By that time Stafford will have raised a strong enough host to defend Casterly Rock and break Robb Stark. Tywine said, laying out his plan. Mace Tyrell will come from the south, but the march will take time, and if Stafford can hold Casterly Rock and damage Robb Stark's forces enough and we are able to throw back Stannis and Renly, we will gain allies. Beating the Baratheon brothers here at King's Landing will give us the Stormlands and likely force Dorne to pick a side. I mean to make them choose our side. If we can do all of this, we can bring Robb Stark to the table. But we cannot send our soldiers to the west while the Baratheons bear down on us. The rock must defend itself for now. He said before pausing and sitting up straighter. Send word to Doran Martell. Tell him we offer him the Princess Myrcella for his son Tristan. Before Tywine could continue, his daughter interrupted. What? You cannot take my daughter from me. She stood nearly yelling at him. I can and I am. It is your inability to control the king that we are in this mess. No allies and a broken army. This is the price you pay for ineptitude. Tywine finished, venom in his voice. His daughter might be Queen Regent, but he had declared the Lioness in that moment. Whatever power Cersei had as regent came from her father. She could not form words because of her anger and so left the chamber. He expected she would go to Myrcella. There was nothing Cersei could do, however. And what of the Iron Islands? Petyr Baelish asked with a smile. Shall we send our prince to wed Asha Greyjoy? He asked, to some degree it was a jest. If you think Balon Greyjoy will risk Robb Stark beheading his son to join our side, you are a fool. Tywine said, not appreciating Baelish's tone. There is nothing we can do to bring the Iron Islands to our side so long as Balon Greyjoy is their lord. Tywine paused. No, they will need a new Greyjoy. Send word to the Victorian Greyjoy. Tell him the Iron Islands needs a new lord. Tell him if he joins us the North and Riverlands are his. Tywine said, smiling. Hopefully the Iron Islands could at least provide a distraction for Robb Stark. As to the prince and king, we will keep them available for suitors. If Doran turns down Myrcella, we will give his Arianna king. Tywine said shrewdly. Shouldn't we also deal with Robb Stark as well, my lord? Janos Slynt asked. What do you think I have been talking about this entire time? Lord Tywine asked without emotion. I mean, should we not have him assassinated? Janos said. As he finished Varys and Baelish chuckled slightly. The new commander of the City Watch seems to think assassination is an easy matter. Baelish said mockingly. Lord Slynt, attempting to assassinate someone is no simple task. It is made even more difficult when your target is on the move and you have no allies willing to stab him in his sleep. Varys said, pointing out how ludicrous an idea it was to attempt assassinating Robb Stark. You are also incredibly ignorant to think that killing him will end the war. He has 5 siblings, 4 of whom are going to be safe in Winterfell and his wife is pregnant with his heir. If Robb Stark dies, my son dies as well, and we would still not in a better position. I will not risk my son's life for a foolish attempt at ending the war. Robb Stark's crown is secure, and his forces will remain united. Tywine said as Janos opened his mouth to speak again, but Tywine cut him off. And you are an even bigger fool if you think it would be smart to attempt to assassinate his pregnant queen and all of his siblings along with him. That would be even more difficult to accomplish considering they are separated, and killing his pregnant wife would likely enrage Robb Stark enough to send me Jaime's head. I will not risk that happening. Not to mention you would set both the Reach against us permanently. If we had allies and the opportunity to do such a thing, I would agree, but so long as he holds Jaime and is protected by his guards, we will not be able to touch him or his family. Tywine finished and Janos stayed silent. Janos was a fool when it came to how the game was played. If that is all, my lords, leave me. Tywine said as the lords rose to leave. Tywine then summoned his son Tyrion to him. Tyrion found himself in the not-so-happy presence of his father. He walked forward taking a seat. Tyrion reached for the flagon of wine, but Tywine took the flagon but then poured Tyrion a glass. The dwarf found himself perplexed as to his father's actions. "Good to see you, father," was all Tyrion said. Right now was not the time to joke with his father. "I heard you attempted to save Ned Starks from being executed." Tywine began, giving no hint of what he thought of the action. "I did. When I spoke with him, he knew that the only way we were going to get out of this was if he lived, and it seems he wished to make himself a martyr just so we would burn. He was not as bad at the game as my sister and I had hoped." Tyrion finished. "You at least had the sense to try and avert this catastrophe. The Queen Regent seems to have sat on her hands, happy to seize Lord Stark and bring the North down on us. I am told you also advised her against this as well, and that you tried to order Ned's life be spared in the throne room only to be ignored." Tywine paused. "Had Cersei given you a place of authority like she should have, you might have been listened to. A mistake I will not repeat." Tywine finished. Tyrion was dumbfounded at his father's compliments. "What are you suggesting?" Tyrion asked, wondering if his father might make a joke for the first time in his life. "I am naming you Master of Laws. We will not have this boyking executing hostages and prisoners without my say-so." Tywine finished. "Master of Laws. I have never in my life managed the king's peace before. I have studied law and justice, but I have no idea how to apply it." Tyrion said, almost begging for the responsibility to be gone. "Why not my uncle, why not anyone else, why me?" Tyrion asked, hoping to be saved. "Kevan will be busy mustering soldiers from the Crown lands, and you are my son." Tywine said, the words ringing in Tyrion's ears. He was speechless as his father stood. "Go, get some rest, we have a meeting early in the morning and I expect you to be present." "I have much work to do as well," Tywine said, now looking at papers in front of him. Tyrion rose and left without a word. In a single moment, he went from being the dwarf of Casterly Rock, hated and reviled by his father, to being one of the most powerful men in the realm. He had also for the first time in his life received a compliment from Tywine, and Tyrion found himself wanting to do his best at his new job. He just wished he did not have to work so hard against a dear friend, against Robb. In Riverrun, Robb was examining new armor made for his Wolfsguard. "Gendry, these are beautiful," Robb said as he, Sir Barristan, Theon, and Jon examined the new Wolfsguard armor. They were made of white steel that glistened like moonlight. Gendry had used a technique he had learned from Toib Homart to color the steel without painting it. The armor had the Stark direwolf on the chest plate, and the shoulder plates had wolves bearing their fangs. The armor looked light but had been made using the same technique as Robb's, so it was just as strong as heavy plate. There were 6 sets of the armor. I had these made for us too. Gendry opened a box to show 6 white waist capes with the stark direwolf on them and 1 silver one. Why are there 7? Robb asked. The silver one is for you, your grace. I was looking at your armor the other day and recognized it as a set that I worked on back on the Street of Steel. I wanted to add the waist cape to it, but Master Mart wouldn't let me. Said it made it too flashy. But now that you're a king, I would bet you could use a little flash. Gendry smiled before remembering his manners. Your grace. He smiled and added as Robb chuckled. It is perfect, Gendry. Thank you. I will have it sewn onto the armor's lining. Robb finished shaking the hand of his new wolf guard. Did you make helmets? Jon asked politely. Gendry had been hard at work. He had made a new hammer for himself, a large 2-handed weapon with a large rounded head on one side with 2 spikes, one on the back of the hammerhead and one on top of the weapon. He had also made new armor for Jon and Theon and every member of the Wolf's Guard. Gendry had also been training, making sure he would be able to protect his new king. I did. Took me longer cause I didn't make them the same. Lots of work you put me through, Gendry said with a smile as he showed the many different helmets. The 6 helms were individualized. Ser Barristan's had no ornamentations and was rounded with a lifting Ti-slotted face visor. Lora's had flowers stamped into the steel and a full moving face mask. Robar's had runes stamped into it and looked very similar to Ser Barristan's helmet, just with a different style of face mask. Abadal's was a large drum-like helm similar to the Mountain's helm. Sirio's helm was an open-faced helm that covered the entirety of his head and neck but lets his face open. Then there was a bull helm next to them. All were white like the armor. Is that yours, Gendry? Robb asked, motioning to the white bull helm. I made one like it in King's Landing, but I lost it when we was attacked on the King's Road. Gendry said, looking at the helm. It was large and had horns on top like a bull that went up then curved forward. The bull's whole face and horns looked like they could be hinged up to expose the face, and the eyes on the helm were large but connected in the middle by another slit to allow the wearer to see better. I ain't never felt much like a stag. But a bull. That feels right to me. Gendry said, nodding his head. He and Robb had had the chance to talk about Robert. Robb could see his adoptive uncle in Gendry and felt a brother's bond with him. Gendry told Robb he did not want to be king even when Robb offered it to him. He just wanted revenge for the father he never got to know. I think that works well for you, Gendry. Gendry the bull. Ser Barristan the Bold declared to the young man. Gendry smiled and nodded, never having been happier. Later that afternoon he saw his siblings off as they were given an extremely heavy escort led by Ser Rodrik. Their mother stayed behind, and Robb had summoned her and Loras to him. How are you doing, mother? Robb asked as his mother sat in the study he had been given at Riverrun. Robb was crownless, preferring only wearing the thing when he held court. Watching them leave and not going with them was hard. But they have Rodrik, their guards, and 3 large wolves. Catelyn gave a sad smile to Robb. He had asked her to stay but had not told her why yet. I need you to go to Storm's End to treat with Renly Baratheon. Robb said more seriously. She looked surprised, as did Loras. Why me? Why not send one of your lords? Why not send Ser Loras? She asked curiously, trying to get out of it all. She motioned to Loras, who was in the room with them. I am sending Ser Loras. You will guard my mother and aid in negotiations, but mother, you know Renly as well. When I am done with the Lannisters, I do not want to have to face down the Storm Lords. Robb said as he spoke to Loras and Catelyn. I knew Renly when he was a boy and I only spoke with him briefly at your wedding. I am no more equipped than one of your lords. She said, trying to make it seem as if she did not know the man. She did know him well actually, and she even admitted to herself that she was probably the best qualified person to go to Renly besides Loras. You do know Renly better than anyone save Ser Loras, and I am sending him with you. Robb said, echoing her own thoughts. I want Renly to take my offer seriously, and if my terms come from my lady mother and a sworn member of my Wolf's Guard, he will know I mean what I offer him. Robb finished, seeing his mother cave to the request. I will leave at once, your grace. Catelyn said, standing, knowing her son was placing a lot of faith in her. Ser Loras, is this all right with you? Rob asked, knowing there was a degree of anxiousness to the situation on Laura's part. He and Renly had a falling out in King's Landing and Renly would likely not want to see him. It was also likely Laura's would be one of the only people in the world Renly would trust right now. "May we speak in private, Your Grace?" Laura's asked, and he nodded, his mother dismissing herself. "I am not sure if Renly will be happy to see me, Your Grace," Laura's said, taking a seat. "Laura's in private, please just call me Rob," Rob ordered kindly. "And you are likely one of the only people he will trust." Rob gave Laura's a look of knowing. "I know you love him, Laura's, and I swear I would never hold that against you. I need you to deliver Renly for me, or I will be forced to take him on after the Lannisters are defeated. There is no way peace could exist if he insisted. I bend my knee to him," Rob finished. He did not want to have to say that, but Laura's needed to know he was willing to kill Renly if it was for the kingdom. "I will do everything I can, Rob. Thank you for your trust in me," Laura's finished with conviction in his voice. "Protect my mother, Sir Laura's," Rob said, standing, and Laura's left. Laura's and Catelyn left that same day and began the long ride to Storm's End. The next day Rob found himself riding through the ranks of his assembled army. 70,000 Northermen, Reachmen, and Valimen assembled ready to march. He had decided to wear his crown, armor, and furs as he came to the head of his army, flanked by his Wolf's Guard minus Sir Loras and his two most trusted companions Jon and Theon. Brynden Tully and Roose Bolton were waiting for him at the head of the force, and when Rob gave the word their march began, and Fury marched with them. Notes. Wanted to give a quick rundown of what is going on in King's Landing and what is going on with Tyrion. Not really much to say other than I wanted to point out that in this scenario Tywin is backed into a corner with not many options. Why Victarion and not Euron, as Tywin's play at the Iron Islands? Victation is easier to control, and Euron, honestly, well, book Euron is terrifying, and given some of the mystery surrounding his character in the books, I'm not entirely sure I could really do him justice in this story. So Victarion it is, lol. There will be some very different negotiations going on at Storm's End in this story, so look forward to that. Also wanted to give a quick update on Winter Wars Part 2. I have hit a major writer's block and have not been able to sit down and actually write the story at a level that I want it to be at. I know I said by the end of this summer it would be finished and then I could go into editing, but I may need to push that back a little bit, we will see. Just want everyone to know how that is coming. I hope you all enjoyed this chapter. Chapter 30, The King in Storm's End. Notes. Hope you all enjoy this chapter. Also, it has been 3 weeks since I started posting this story, and wow. Just wow, everyone, thank you so much for all the love this story has gotten. I am blown away. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Catelyn and Loras arrived at Storm's End to no celebration. They were met several leagues out by a scout meant to guard the camp that had been built outside of the fortress. Who goes there? State your business, the scout ordered in sight of Storm's End. My name is Catelyn Stark. I have been sent here to treat with His Grace, King Renly of House Baratheon, on behalf of His Grace, King Robb of House Stark, Catelyn said. The sentence sounded odd to her. For nearly 3 centuries there had only been one king, save a Targaryen succession crisis or two, and now there were 4 kings. They were brought into the camp and then into the massive castle itself. Storm's End was the strongest castle in all of Westeros. Like at Winterfell, an army that wanted to take it could not simply attack the walls with grappling hooks, ropes, and makeshift ladders. They would need siege engines or dragons. Rounds would never breach the massive oaken gate of Storm's End, both because of its size and the fact that a drawbridge protected the gate. When the drawbridge was up, Storm's End was an island. Like Riverrun, but several times the size. However, instead of water in its moat, the moat was a sheer cliffside on one end and Shipbreaker Bay on the other. The only way to take Storm's End was by waiting out the defenders, having dragons, or marrying into it. Catelyn Stark was going to attempt to bring Storm's End and all its power to her son's side without using siege engines, dragons, or her daughters. Just her wits and the threat of her son's host. Robb had told his mother that Sansa was off the table for the time being after her experience in the capital. Renly would get no bride from Robb. My lady. A steward approached them after they dismounted their horses in the yard. The king will see you now. he said as he led them on foot to the large central drum tower. On the bottom floor of the tower, where it was widest, was a large hall where a golden throne had been placed. It was wood-painted gold, obviously built quickly for the new king, and seated on it was Renly. He wore fine golden silks and a stag crown was on his head. The massive hall was filled with knights, storm lords, and beautiful ladies. Renly was holding court and hearing a petition when the steward brought Lady Stark and Sir Loras in. Their entrance did not attract attention as Renly finished hearing the petition before him. Catelyn heard a peasant responding to some kind act made by Renly as she and Loras walked in. "Thank you, your grace. You are too kind," the peasant said, bowing before leaving. The steward walked forward, and that is when Renly and Loras locked eyes. It seemed as though their reunion may not be a happy one as Renly looked at him with betrayal in his eyes. "Your grace, I have the honor of bringing Lady Catelyn of House Stark, as an envoy for her son Robb, the Lord of Winterfell. Lord of Winterfell and King in the North, the Trident, the Reach, and the Vale." Catelyn corrected, and her words drew Loras and Renly's attention away from one another. Renly did not look happy at the titles her son claimed, but Lady Stark did not flinch in front of him. "My lady, welcome to Storm's End. It is a pleasure seeing you." Renly responded politely, smiling. "I am so sorry for your loss." Renly looked at her with genuine sadness in his eyes. He had not wished for Eddard to die and was truly heartbroken when he heard the news. "You are most kind," Lady Catelyn said, choking back emotion. "My lady, I swear to you I will see the Lannisters answer for your husband's murder," Renly said with anger. "When I take King's Landing, I'll bring you Joffrey's head," he said loudly for his court to hear. They cheered in response to their king's words. "It will be enough to know that justice was done, my lord," Lady Stark said. Renly's last statement had brought her great emotion, and Catelyn realized her slip-up too late. She did not mean to offend and called Renly by his lordly title by accident. "Your grace," a tall blonde woman in blue armor corrected. Lady Catelyn looked over. Catelyn did not show any emotion on her face now. She was fine with being chastised in private about her slip-up by King Renly, but she would not take such chastisement in public, especially not from a member of Renly's Rainbow Guard. "And you should kneel when you approach the king," the warrior woman said with bite. "There is no need for that. Lady Stark is an honored guest." Renly quickly stepped in, knowing Lady Catelyn had a sharp enough tongue to eviscerate the newest member of his Rainbow Guard. "Has your son taken the rock yet?" a knight near the front asked mockingly. The she-warrior in blue armor had obviously opened up some wounds in the members of the court. Robb had claimed 4 of Renly's kingdoms, and his lords did not take this lightly. Renly had been polite, but the members of the court were not. "I do not sit on my son's war council, and if I did, I would not share his strategies with you," Catelyn responded with a measured tone. Sir Loras was also getting agitated by the members of the court. He had been with Robb through much of what he had accomplished and believed in his brother by law. Renly on the other hand had sat at Storm's End throwing a tourney for his coronation. His army had been fully marshalled for near a month and he had done nothing. Loras could see that Renly had hoped for Tywin and Robb to destroy each other before taking them both. However, Robb had foiled this by crushing Tywin without taking too many losses, and only now was he getting ready to march on the capital while the young wolf was away in the west. "If Robb Stark wants a pact with us, he should come himself, not hide behind his mother's skirts," the knight responded, his tone and demeanor incredibly impolite. Loras was about to speak, but Lady Catelyn was quicker on the draw. "My son is fighting a war, good sir. That is much more than I can say for you." Her response was cold, true, and directed at Renly. She had called out Renly for sitting on his ass without being technically impolite to the king in Storm's End. Some in the court laughed, imagining her insult had been directed at the knight and not the king. Some fell silent, knowing her words were true. Renly smiled and stood. "Don't worry, my lady. Our war is just beginning," he said, motioning for her to follow him into a more private setting. They arrived in a chamber higher in the drum tower. The Blue Knight accompanied them. The door closed and Renly bid Catelyn to take a seat. Wine was brought to them, then the room was only occupied by the Blue She-Warrior, Loras, Catelyn, and Renly. The king took his seat with his Rainbow Guard standing next to him as Loras stood next to where Catelyn was seated. Your son has done remarkably well in the field, my lady. Truth be told, I had not expected him to succeed as much as he has. Renly said politely. How forgetful of me, this is Brian of Tarth, the newest member of my Rainbow Guard. He finally introduced Brian, who politely bowed her head. Caitlin bowed her head slightly, then redirected her attention back to Renly. My son wants terms with you, Your Grace. Caitlin said at the last part, glancing up at Brian. That is good to hear. Renly said with a smile. I have my own terms for him if you would like to hear them. His tone was happy, but there was veiled impatience. He had not appreciated Rob's declaration as king. He will bend the knee and swear fealty to me. I will name him my Warden of the North, and we can destroy the Lannisters together. Renly smiled at the last part. Loras spoke up, making his incredulity known. You cannot be serious. Loras said, obviously out of turn, as Caitlin and Renly both looked at him. I am rather serious, Sir Loras. Renly said, no longer happy. I am the king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and the protector of the realm. Rob currently holds 4 of the kingdoms in open rebellion. He will bend the knee, or when I am finished with the Lannisters I will come for him next. By then he will have 5 kingdoms. Caitlin said, nearly speaking over Renly. And it will be he who crushes the Lannisters, not you. Do you really think it is that hard to see what is going on here, Your Grace? You wait in Storm's End, your army ready to march at a moment's notice. You waited to hear how my son and Tywin beat each other's armies to a pulp. Then you planned to come in and sweep them away. I do wonder what it must have felt like to hear my son had crushed Tywin and was marching on the Rock with nearly 120,000 men. Caitlin said, making it clear who was in command of these negotiations. Caitlin knew that had Rob wanted it, he could likely bring the Stormlands to heel. The only kingdom that was truly out of her son's reach was Dorne. It would be folly even for an army of 100,000 to march into their deserts. Just as it would be folly to march into the north. But for all Rob's power, he did not want the Stormlands. He did not wish for war with Renly. If Rob could minimize the slaughter, he would. You lack for allies as much as the Lannisters do, Your Grace. We heard of how Doran Martell turned down your offer of marriage to his heir. Arianne Martell would have made a splendid queen for you. It is a pity Doran does not believe you will win. Caitlin said, referencing the fact that it was common knowledge that the Prince of Dorne had declined an alliance with Renly. Dorne would not enter this war unless they had a very good reason to, or there would be a clear winner. They did not believe Renly could beat both Rob and Tywin. Renly looked as if he had been kneecapped by Lady Stark's words. She was right about everything, and if Renly continued to wait, he would risk fighting Rob. He composed himself. What does your son offer? Renly said. He knew it was very likely Rob would demand his fealty, but what he was about to be offered stunned him. 40,000 men and 250 ships. Lady Stark said. The statement caused Renly to look at her with surprise. I don't understand, my lady. Renly said, asking for clarification. He will give you 20,000 soldiers from the Reach and 20,000 from the Riverlands, so you may join them with your 30,000 and take King's Landing while he takes the Westerlands. The Shivering Sea Fleet will sail immediately for King's Landing and aid you in the attack. In return you will renounce all claim to the North, Riverlands, Reach, Vale, and Westerlands. He will recognize you as the king on the Iron Throne and support you against anyone who would wish to take the Crownlands and Stormlands from you. He will swear off any claim to the Iron Islands and Dorne. Caitlin paused before continuing. Finally, should your brother attempt to attack you or make claim to your throne, my son will aid you in defeating him. Caitlin finished giving her son's terms to Renly. Renly leaned back in his chair. These were probably going to be the best terms he would get. He was unsure of how hard these terms were and so decided to test to see if he could bend them. I want the Westerlands. He stated, hoping Caitlin would at least bend a little. Out of the question. Caitlin responded. That was all she needed to say. Rob would add the Westerlands to his kingdom, and if Renly wanted them, he would have to fight Rob for the gold-rich region. Your son asks for no fealty from me and would allow me to keep my crown. Renly asked, clarifying one last time her terms. Yes, and this is the only time King Rob will offer these terms. His next terms will come at the end of a sword. she said, implying Rob was more than willing to fight. Renly really did not have much choice. There was no way to truly attack Rob to get better terms. Renly had no navy to transport his men. If he decided to attack the Reach, he would be stopped at Bitterbridge, and it was likely Mace Tyrell's army in the west would swing back around and crush him. But if Renly accepted Rob's terms, he could still be king, and Rob would more than double Renly's army. Rob was a man of his word, and Renly knew this offer would be honored. "Renly, please," Loras said, hoping, praying his love would accept the offer. His eyes begged Renly to accept. "You will need to take King's Landing if you mean to convince Dorne and the Iron Islands to call you king," Catelyn said, knowing it was true. Although, it was unlikely that the Iron Islands would recognize Renly. Theon was their heir, and he was fully committed to Rob. Frankly, the only thing in the way of the Iron Islands joining Rob was Balon Greyjoy. However, if Renly did take King's Landing, Doran Martell would be more inclined to reconsider Renly's offer, bringing Dorne to Renly's side. Doran may even approach Renly for a marriage alliance once it is announced that Rob and Renly were allies. Renly had made his decision. "I understand, my lady. I will accept your son's terms. There is no need for war between us. We are natural allies." Renly stood smiling and standing. These were better terms than what he had expected. Catelyn stood up, smiling only to hear the sounds of horns from outside. She and Renly looked at each other as if asking the other if the horns were their own. Renly made his way out of the room followed by the other three and came to a balcony to see ships in Shipbreaker Bay. The sails had a sigil that Renly only partially recognized. It was a stag, but the stag was in a heart that was on fire. In the west, Rob approached the Golden Tooth with his army. His scouts estimated that the castle was garrisoned with at least 5,000 men, many of whom were survivors from Jaime Lannister's broken army. The castle was not large and would not normally present a difficult fight based on its size, except that the Tooth was practically built to stop a larger force. It sat perched on the top of a hill that overlooked the winding road below. An attack from the west would have been much easier. The only problem is Rob had no way to get to the west except through the Tooth. Rob needed to think, so he, Jon, and Theon went riding with the Wolf's Guard among the hills near their camp. They were also accompanied by the now very large direwolves Ghost and Grey Wind. Ghost has grown to rival his siblings in size, but Grey Wind was still largest of them all. The biggest problem was that the garrison knew they were coming. Tywine had sent word to the Lannister forces in the Westerlands to prepare for a likely attack, and Rob had been harried on his approach to the Tooth. He had not sustained much damage, but Tywine had been right in his prediction, which took away any surprise entrance into the Westerlands. "We could attempt to go further south and attack through Deep Den," Jon suggested as they slowly rode through the grass. "It would take too long to march further south. Our spies report that an army is gathering near Oxcross. Stafford Lannister will have 10,000 men in a month. It is the same reason we cannot afford the time for a siege," Rob countered. He had received word of the mustering army in the Westerlands. Stafford was gathering an army from what was left of the men in the Westerlands. He had made his camp outside Oxcross so that he was more centrally located and could pull men from all corners of the Westerlands. Rob had received word that many of these soldiers were old men and young boys. However, there were also sellswords and freeriders among them. The longer Rob waited, the more likely it was Stafford would have an army that could reinforce the garrison at Casterly Rock, making it much more difficult if not impossible to take, and they needed to take the rock to break the Lannister power in the west. Just as Theon was about to speak, he stopped, noticing the direwolves heading away from them, smelling the ground. "Where are they off to?" Theon asked, pointing at the direwolves as they went between two hills. The group followed them and found what might have been the most important trail of the whole war. That night Rob was in the war tent having summoned his lords. "Our scouts we sent down the trail report that it leads to the other side of the mountains into the Westerlands. My lords, it bypasses the Golden Tooth entirely," Rob said with a smile. His lords looked at him with smiles of excitement. "We should march through them immediately and attack the army at Oxcross." Lord Hornwood spoke. "I agree with your idea in theory, my lord, but not in practice. We have a very large army and it only takes one raven to tell Casterly Rock that we are coming. The end of the trail is still a bottleneck and they could likely defend it if they knew we were coming," Rob said, deflating the lord's excitement. However, John began finishing what Rob had started. We can take a cavalry force, say 6,000, through the pass without them realizing we have moved our army. We leave the main force here, attack the army at Oxcross, then wheel around and surround the Tooth. If they surrender, great. If they do not, we simply bypass the Tooth and secure it later from the west. John finished. The lords had no questions, they were ready for battle. That same day near sunset, Rob led his cavalry on the trail. The army outside the Tooth made no overt movements, making it seem as though they were going to wait out the garrison inside. The forces within the Tooth never saw Rob backtrack with his cavalry force into the pass. Rob came out the other side of the pass when darkness covered the land. The trail naturally dumped them out near Oxcross, and so he and his men prepared for battle in the forest overlooking Oxcross. Looks like Stafford has not set a perimeter. Doesn't seem he listened to Tywin's warning. Theon whispered as he finished speaking with a scout. Rob and his men had approached uncontested. The idiot lion appears to think he is safe in his own lands. John whispered in response. Let's make him feel unsafe. Rob said, nodding to the messenger near him. The soldier rode off and their plan was in motion. Rob had several of his men cut the horses in the camp loose from where they had been tied up. Once the men returned, Rob and John loosed Grey Wind and Ghost amongst the horses, sending them into a panic. It was chaos below them as Rob lowered his face mask and drew his sword. Rob raised his sword and the Great Jon took the opportunity to let loose a war cry. The king in the north. The Great Jon yelled as the men responded. The king in the north. They all yelled before charging down on the camp. The battle was a slaughter as the army at Oxcross had barely even been trained, and with the panic that swept through the camp prior to the attack they had not been ready for what came. Rob walked the camp that morning as dead and dying Lannisters were dealt with. He was accompanied by his generals and Wolfsguard. Ghost and Grey Wind were off filling their stomachs with lion. What are our casualties? Rob asked to any of his generals that knew. Lord Bolton responded. We count 12 dead and 22 wounded, but all are minor and will be able to move when you need them to, Your Grace. Not a bad evening then. Theon responded, but Rob was still assessing the victory. What of the Lannister army? Rob asked. His attention back Roose. Near total destruction of their army here. We count 5,000 dead and another 2,000 wounded, Your Grace. We also managed to take some highborn prisoners, but Stafford Lannister is dead. Lord Bolton replied as his son came running up to him and said something in his ear. Your Grace, Lord Roland Crickehall wishes an audience with you. Shall I have him brought to you? Lord Bolton said, communicating Domeric's message to King Rob. Aye, bring him to me. Rob said as he entered Stafford Lannister's old tent. A few minutes later Roland was brought in. He was a tall man with black hair. He was lean and looked strong. His hands were chained, and he was covered in dirt and dry blood, with some wounds looking to have been cleaned and bandaged. Have your wounds been seen to, my lord? Rob taking a seat near the back of the tent. They have, Your Grace. Nothing your field maester thinks is life-threatening. He cleaned them and sent me on my way. It was kind of you to make him available to me, Your Grace. Roland said with gratitude but not a smile. You asked to speak with me, my lord. Rob said before offering the chair near him to Lord Crickehall to sit on. Yes, Your Grace. I wished to ask what you intend to do with my men. They are good loyal soldiers and it would sadden me greatly to see them executed. Lord Crickehall said, not sitting. Lord Crickehall cared for his men and came before Rob to beg for their lives. Rob had taken nearly 1,000 unwounded prisoners in the battle, and the wounded were all considered prisoners as well. He had been able to scatter his prisoners from the Whispering Wood, camps, Ruby Ford, and Harrenhal among the many castle and holdfasts in the Riverlands. He only kept Jaime Lannister close. Although it would be prudent to keep a few of the highborn prisoners with him from Oxcross given their knowledge of the Westerlands. But Rob had no intention of executing prisoners. My lord, your concern for your men is honorable. I do not intend to execute any prisoners. Rob said, seeing the lord's face show relief. Thank you, Your Grace, you are most benevolent. Lord Roland said, his relief all too plain, and the lord finally took a seat. Lord Crickehall, I have no intention of butchering men who surrender or are captured. I am sorry this has caused you anxiety. Rob said to the lord seated in front of him. No, your grace, it is all right. Frankly, if anyone has reason for butchery and fury, it is you. I am sorry about your father. I met him after the sacking of King's Landing. He was the only one to challenge Robert when he saw the bloodshed that had occurred. He was an honorable man and did not deserve his fate. Lord Crickehall finished. Rob gave the lord a sad smile. Thank you, my lord. It is good to know that even among my enemies there are those who know justice. Rob said, signaling a guard to come collect Lord Crickehall. See that Lord Crickehall is given water and food and make sure all the prisoners are given care. We will find them more permanent accommodations in the Riverlands. Rob said so that Lord Crickehall knew what his intentions were for the prisoners he had. Rob did not like the idea of executing prisoners, but he did not have to. The Riverlands were secure, so he would simply spread them out amongst the castles there. King Rob intended to be just in his vengeance. He did not want to slaughter the innocent or burn villages and rape women. He wanted the Lannisters to be brought to justice, and he would do so with honor. Notes. I really enjoyed writing this and the next chapter just because it allowed me to finally get back to writing scenes that we have in the books. You get to see more depth of characters, but more importantly you get to see some really big changes that happened because of the differences in this story. It was fun to repurpose some of the lines from the show and the books to this chapter, and I really enjoyed writing it. I did make that change that Grey Wind is bigger than Ghost, and that was just a personal change, no real reason behind it, lol, I just preferred it. That Roland Crickehall meeting is important moving forward, and I hope that you all keep it in the back of your heads as Rob conquers the Westerlands. Now he will be viewed as more than just a conqueror in the West, but as hopefully a just ruler. I also hope you noticed that because the Riverlands are secure there is no real threat in moving prisoners there. That was something that Rob had struggled with in the books and show, was that prisoners were a problem because he did not have a secure place to put them, but now he does. Hope you all enjoyed. Next chapter was one of my favorites to write, so I hope you will take a look at it tomorrow. Chapter 31, The King in the Narrow Sea. Notes. Hope you all enjoy this chapter because this was easily one of my favorites to write. I love dialogue pieces where characters have to deal with one another. So I hope you enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Stannis had called for parley and the drawbridge at Storm's End was lowered. Renly, Catelyn, Loras and the whole Rainbow Guard were present on their horses and rode to a neutral point just outside Renly's encamped army. Stannis had landed his forces some distance north and they were felling trees for siege weapons. Catelyn waited with Renly as Stannis rode forward. He wore simple clothing, a studded leather jerkin and worn leather pants and boots. On his head was a crown of red gold, its points formed into shapes like flames. He was accompanied by several riders, two of whom stuck out to Catelyn. One was an older man who had kind but weathered eyes. The other was a strikingly beautiful woman with the brightest red hair that Catelyn had ever seen, even brighter than Sansa's hair. The wind was blowing, and the Stark banner held by one of her other guards whipped and snapped in the wind along with the Baratheon banner of Renly. With their forces united, Renly could not have looked smugger. Stannis and his party came trotting to a halt in front of them. Both Renly and Stannis' camps were in view. Stannis spoke first. "Lady Stark." "Lord Stannis." Catelyn replied. Catelyn had given Renly the courtesy of being called a king, but now that they were allies, calling Stannis a king would be seen as an insult to Renly. Better to offend a neutral party than an ally. Catelyn noticed Stannis' clenched jaw at the use of a lordly title but would not waste words to correct her. "I had not thought to find you at Storm's End," Stannis said. "I had not thought to be here," Catelyn replied, intentionally leaving off his lordly title in case it would anger him more. Stannis was about to show why he was known as a man of few courtesies. "I am sorry for your lord's death. Although he was no friend of mine," Stannis said coldly. Catelyn had expected this type of attitude from Stannis. "He was never your enemy, my lord." Catelyn added the lordly title back, not really caring now if it made him mad. "When Lords Tyrell and Redwyne held you prisoner here in your own castle, my lord husband lifted the siege and saved you from starving," Catelyn said, making a point of her husband's saving of Stannis' lordly ass. "At my brother's command, not for love of me. Lord Eddard did his duty, I will not deny this, but I also did mine." Stannis said, his demeanor souring. I should have been Robert's hand. That was your brother's will. Catelyn responded coldly. Ned did not want it. She was getting a little tired of speaking to Stannis about her husband. But he took it anyways. That which should have been mine. Still, I give you my word, you shall have justice for his murder. Stannis said, sitting higher on his horse. These kings and their promises for heads. It began to bother Catelyn, as only her son had done any fighting and was the only one truly seeking justice at this very moment. Your brother promised me the same thing. However, justice is to be found in King's Landing, so why are you here? Catelyn asked, deciding to move away from conversation about her husband. Dragonstone is close to King's Landing. I would imagine of most of the lords in Westeros it is you who could get there first. So why come to Storm's End? Catelyn finished her question. You are frank, my lady. To take King's Landing I need the lords who have gathered here. My brother has them and I have come to claim them. Stannis replied with no emotion. Men give their allegiance where they will. If you were to put aside your quarrel and join with Renly, I would imagine, Catelyn began, only to be cut off by Stannis. I have no quarrel with Renly so long as he does his duty to me. I am his elder and his king. I mean to have only what is mine by rights. I come for his loyalty and obedience and that of the lords. Stannis said before furrowing his brow. And what is your purpose here, Lady Stark? Has House Stark cast its lot with my brother? Stannis looked to wish to continue, but Catelyn decided not to let him. My son reigns as king in the north, the Trident, the Reach, and the Vale. She said with pride. Catelyn would have normally stopped with king in the north, but she intended to remind Stannis that she was here on behalf of the most powerful king in Westeros. He reigns by the gift of his people, by the election of his lords, and by conquest. Catelyn said the last part as a warning. He bends the knee to no man. However, he is willing to extend a hand of friendship to all. She finished, giving Stannis an opportunity to speak now. Kings have no friends, only subjects and enemies. Stannis said, his eyes darkened as Cat's narrowed. Renly decided now to be the time to step in and defuse the situation. And brothers? Renly said, gaining Stannis' attention now. Renly looked the opposite to Stannis. He wore his stag crown, but he wore golden armor and his cape draped over the back of his horse like a river of gold. He was young and polished while Stannis was old and worn. Catelyn could see why people would follow Renly by just his look alone. But she also knew what was needed to be an effective king, and Renly lacked the stomach for war, whereas Stannis had a stomach seemingly meant for war. I cannot help but wonder whose standard that is. Renly said with a look of mocking curiosity on his face, pointing at Stannis' banner. My own. Stannis replied. The king has taken for his sigil the fiery heart of the Lord of Light. The red-haired woman began. Catelyn figured this was the Red Priestess that they had heard about. Probably for the best. The battle would be dreadfully confusing if we both used the same sigil. Renly said with a smile. Hopefully there will be no need for a battle. We share a common enemy. Catelyn said, trying to avoid bloodshed. Stannis' eyes darkened again. The Iron Throne is mine, by rights. All those who deny it are my enemies. The whole realm denies it from dawn to the war. Old men deny it in their death rattles and babes deny it in their mothers' wombs. Renly said, growing serious. No one wants you for their king. Renly spat through gritted teeth. I swore I would not treat with you while you wore a false crown. If only I had kept that oath. Stannis said with anger in his voice. This is ridiculous. Catelyn interjected. Tywin Lannister's armies have been crippled and he has fallen back to the capital. Your united strength could crush him while my son takes the Westerlands. Yet, you sit here trading insults. You are brothers, act like it. She said in an almost inappropriately motherly tone. She was speaking to the two kings as if they were Rickon and Bran. My son is the only one who has fought our true enemy. He has won more victories in this war than either of you have seen battles. Catelyn finished. Renly had already received his chastisement from Catelyn 2 days ago, and so her tone did not shock him, but Stannis was a picture of restrained anger. I am sure the Lannisters won't mind waiting a little longer. Renly spoke, seemingly trying to get Stannis' anger directed at him and not his new ally. If you have terms, make them, or I will be gone. Stannis said, redirecting his attention. Dismount and swear your allegiance to me. Renly spoke calmly. That you shall never have. Stannis replied, rage growing. You served Robert. Why not me? Renly asked, the answer rather obvious. Robert was my elder, you are my younger. Stannis said matter-of-factly. Younger, bolder, far better looking, Renly began, only to be cut off. And a thief and a usurper. Stannis finished. The Targaryens called Robert usurper, he did not seem to mind. Renly said flippantly. Listen to both of you. My sons argue less than you two do. You are brothers, and yet my children are more able to set aside their differences than you. Catelyn interrupted the bickering. She had reached her breaking point. You presume too much, Lady Stark. I am the rightful king and your son no less a traitor than my brother. His day will come. Stannis said, the threat unveiled, and now so was Catelyn's fury. You are the king by rights. Joffrey is a bastard born of incest and you are Robert's heir. Catelyn began, her fury building. Renly was a bit taken back by her words, but if he was offended, he would not be in a moment. But the Iron Throne was forged by the Targaryens, and the Mad King's true heir is Viserys Targaryen, and, where is he? Across the sea in Pentos, or gods know where, doing gods know what. Shall we go and fetch him, since we are all now so concerned about whose right it is to sit the damn throne? Robert's claim to the kingship was his warhammer. His claim was his conquest, just as my son has done. You believe my son's day will come, but you forget, Lord Stannis, that winter comes for us all, and my son will come for you. Catelyn said as she kicked her horse and rode back towards Storm's End, her guards and Loras turning with her as she left. Renly smirked. Catelyn would side with him fully now. There was no chance she would be anything but an enemy to Stannis. He kicked his horse and rode off, following her without a word to his brother. There would be battle tomorrow, a battle Renly would win. That night Catelyn and Loras were sitting in Renly's study when he entered. He had summoned them but had kept them waiting. My apologies, my lady, I was kept with my war council. Renly said, entering with Brian. You wished to speak with us, your grace. Catelyn said politely. Yes, I wanted to thank you for today. You are a fierce ally, and I am also glad that you can now see what a pain my elder brother is. Renly said as he stood in the mirror, allowing Brian to remove his armor. I had never met him. His unyielding nature is baffling. Catelyn said as she suddenly felt an unnatural chill on the air. Brian stepped away, placing a piece of Renly's armor on a rack. I agree. Although I think that Red Priestess has something to do with, Renly's voice lurched, and to Catelyn, Loras, and Brian's horror they saw a shadow standing behind Renly with a sword-like arm sticking through his chest. The shadow then began to dissipate. No. Brian screamed as Loras ran over to Renly, catching him as he fell. Brian fell to her feet next to Renly as Loras held Renly, dead in his arms. The doors burst open as the shadow dissipated and 3 rainbow guards entered. Murderer! One yelled. Traitor! Another, as they drew swords and ran into the room. No, wait please, they didn't. Catelyn was cut off as the 3rd guard came at her. Loras wolf-scarred armor was covered in Renly's blood, but it would soon be covered in more as he killed the guard that came for him and in a moment stabbed the man in the back that attacked Lady Stark. Brian had finished the guard that came for her as well. She then returned to her, weeping over Renly. Loras! Loras! Lady Stark yelled, snapping the man out of his stupor. He stared at Renly's body on the ground, tears in his eyes. We need to leave. This is Stannis doing, but we will not be safe here any longer. Lady Stark said, pulling on his arm to get him to snap out of his stunned stare. Loras had watched as a shadow killed the man he loved. In an instant Renly went from being happy and alive to dead in his arms. But Loras had a duty he had to perform, and so came to, nodding at Lady Stark. Catelyn quickly went over to Brian. Come with us, my lady. It will not be safe for you here. Catelyn said with urgency. I won't leave him. Brian yelled through her tears. You can't avenge him if you are dead. Catelyn yelled back, hoping to play off of her anger. Brian stopped and nodded, and the 3 ran for the stables. No one knew of Renly's death until they had safely ridden from the castle. They needed to tell Robb. They needed him to know that what Stannis used more than sword and shield. He used blood magic and he would see the realm wrapped in darkness as long as he could be king. Notes. I loved writing this chapter because I loved this chapter and the dialogue from the books. I obviously made some edits for readability, changing some of the older style of English used in the books, and made changes to fit the new story. I am a huge Stannis the Manis fan and I actually have a story in the works where he is a major good guy. This story though he will not bend to Robb unfortunately. But keep an eye on Davos when he is fully introduced next chapter. So Renly still dies, but again this is generally something good for the story because it can't be too easy for Robb now, can it? LOL. One of the changes I made was to have Renly and Catelyn meet Stannis together, whereas in the books they arrive separate, with Catelyn arriving first, then Stannis, then Renly. My reason for doing this was that there is an alliance between Robb and Renly, and with Robb being the dominant member to that alliance, his mother would be the one dictating how far negotiations would go between the parties, so they needed to go together with Catelyn attempting to lead negotiations. I hope you all enjoyed. Chapter 32, King of the Iron Islands. Notes. I see a lot of people asking questions about big topics with regard to this story in the future. I promise there will be a resolution to the things that most of you are asking about. Also, I just want to say that you have all been amazing, and I also see your suggestions for how this story should play out moving forward, or your predictions, and I love it. But just so everyone is aware, I want to remind you that this first part of Winter Wars is complete, and while I am not tied to how it is written and am willing to make minor changes, there is a story I want to tell. I hope you all understand that I have made the story logically flow as best I can, while also trying to keep the story fun and be the one I want to tell. I know I can't make everyone happy or write the perfect story, but just know that I am listening and am willing to maybe make changes to the story or listen for new ideas. So with that said, I hope you enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. This was not right. Davos knew that what he had seen, what he had helped do, was wrong. Shadows and a Red Woman. Davos did not sleep the night of Renly's death because he knew what killed the king. He certainly did not like that he had to witness another shadow being birthed the next day when Corte Penrose, Storm's End's Castellan, refused to surrender the castle. Davos was snapped out of his dark musings as they rode through the gates at Storm's End. The garrison had surrendered, and the lords had recognized Stannis as their rightful king. Perhaps that was all that mattered. They had accomplished what they had intended to do when they left Dragonstone. That did not make any of this right. How many men? Stannis asked, no emotion even after he had been given his brother's bannerman. 30,000, Your Grace. All of Lord Renly's former forces. Bryce Caron said. The young man had served as a Rainbow Guard for Renly. He had rallied Renly's forces to Stannis and had offered to fight Corte Penrose in single combat. For these actions Stannis brought him into his inner circle. And where is Edric Storm? Stannis asked more seriously. Davos knew that the boy was key to Stannis' plan. He hoped to use the boy to prove once and for all that Joffrey and his siblings were not Robert's children. Edric was the only acknowledged bastard of Robert and had grown up in Storm's End. He was a bright young lad from what Davos could tell, and kind as well. Now Edric was just a tool for Stannis. He is in his chambers under guard, Your Grace. Should I have him sent to you? Davos asked politely. No, send him on his way to Dragonstone. I will bring him to King's Landing when I take the city and use him to secure the rebel lords. When they see that he bears no resemblance to the bastard Joffrey, they will recognize my right to rule. Stannis said with confidence. Davos was not as convinced. The lords already seemed to be aware of Joffrey's nature, and they had still stood against Stannis. Lady Catelyn's words to Stannis about the right to the throne rang in Davos' ear. He felt this was the attitude of the other lords. My king, there is another matter I wished to discuss with you. Bryce Caron said. What is it? Speak your mind. Stannis said sternly. It is in regard to the Red Woman. Lord Caron began, only for his words to be stepped on by Stannis. Lady Melisandre. Use her name, Caron. She will be shown her due respect. Stannis snapped at the young lord. Apologies, Your Grace. Lady Melisandre. I do not believe she should march with us to King's Landing. Lord Caron said now sheepishly. And why is that, Lord Caron? Stannis asked, narrowing his eyes. Some of the men have spoken as if she has you under her spell. You won your brother's men, do not lose them to her. Bryce spoke, and Stannis looked to be in thought. Davos thought the young man brave for saying such a thing to Stannis. He also happened to agree with the young lord and could not help but think he was right. Stannis continued to think until he looked to have come to a decision. No, she comes with us, Stannis said curtly. Davos was stunned at the decision, as was Lord Caron. Your Grace, if she comes, the men will, Lord Caron began but was cut off. The men will what? Turn their backs on me. They knew full well she came with me here and still came to my side, and I need her. Robb Stark controls over 100,000 soldiers, and I will have to fight him soon. Her aid is necessary, Stannis said, silencing Lord Caron. Your Grace, I would have to agree with Lord Caron. Keeping the Lady Melisandre with us might, Davos began, only to be cut off. I will hear no more on the subject. She comes with us. But you will leave for the Westerlands tomorrow, Stannis said as he examined the battle map in front of him. Your Grace? Davos questioned, wondering why he would be sent all that way when they were so close to marching on the capital. I need to send someone that I trust to treat with Robb Stark. Traitor or not, I am willing to give him a chance to bend the knee to me. He commands a larger force than any in Westeros, and I will need it to take the capital, Stannis said, clenching his jaw for having to admit this. Tywin Lannister has 10,000 soldiers in the capital plus the city watch. If he gathers the army of the Crown Lands to him in the city, we will be hard-pressed to even breach the walls, let alone take the city. I need the Stark army, Stannis finished, almost disgusted at what he had to admit. And what are we going to offer him? What do we have that he would give up his crown for? Davos asked. They had been made aware that Robb had not bent the knee to Renly, but rather had twisted Renly's arm into an alliance. Davos knew this would not work for Stannis. Stannis would have Robb's fealty, or he would have his head. His life, Stannis said, confirming Davos' fears. Tell Robb Stark that if he does not bend the knee to me, I will destroy him. He is to send me 70,000 men, and when he has finished off the Lannisters he will come to King's Landing to bend the knee. If he does not, I will take his head and end his house, Stannis said before turning on his heel to leave the room. You leave at sunrise tomorrow, Stannis said before leaving the room. Davos and Lord Caron were left standing, unable to speak to one another. That night Stannis burned the Godswood in Storm's End and sent Edric Storm to Dragonstone, whereof one Davos' sons and the Princess Shireen also were. Davos left in the morning after seeing the smoking ashes of the ancient Godswood. Robb Stark would not take kindly to this action. In the Westerlands, Robb Stark walked through his new camp that had been established at Oxcross. After the victory there, the Golden Tooth surrendered even before terms were given, and Robb's host passed uncontested. The young wolf was fast becoming a legend. In the north and other friendly regions, stories were being told of how Robb Stark rode into battle on a direwolf, while others said he could become a direwolf. In the capital, however, it was claimed he ate his enemies and cut their hearts out in ancient blood sacrifices to the old gods. Neither were true, but they both had the effect of creating a legendary-like air around Robb, something he channeled now as he approached the holding pen of another Westerosi legend. Robb was in his armor and furs. Frost was at his side and his head was crownless, not needing the crown in this moment. The pen opened and Jaime Lannister raised his head slightly to look at Robb. The king in the north, the Kingslayer mockingly greeted. Robb had not let any other lord keep custody of Jaime for fear of losing him to treachery. Jaime was covered in dirt and mud. His neck was chained to a pole that his hands were chained behind his back. Sir Jaime's legs had also been chained together, and that chain was spiked into the ground. I keep thinking you are going to leave me with one of your bannermen, but you keep dragging me from camp to camp. Jaime's eyes looked at Robb with playful mockery. Are you fond of me, Stark? Missing your wife and thinking I can keep you company? The Kingslayer smirked. Robb clenched his teeth and fought down his anger. If I left you with one of my bannermen, your father would know within a fortnight. My bannermen would receive a raven with a message from him. Release my son and you will be rich beyond your dreams. Refuse and your house will be destroyed root and stem. You don't trust the loyalty of the men following you into battle. Jaime asked, still presenting mockery to the king. Oh, I trust them with my life. Just not with yours. Robb responded curtly. Smart boy. Jaime paused when he saw Robb grit his teeth slightly at being called a boy. What? Don't like being called boy? Insulted. Jaime's voice was thick with mockery, but Robb did not move an inch. Robb showed no emotion as he looked to just outside Jaime's pen. Jaime heard a snarl and suddenly sat up a little straighter. You insult yourself, Kingslayer. The growl became louder and Jaime could see the shadow of the largest beast he had ever seen. You have been beaten by a boy, held captive by a boy, perhaps you will be killed by a boy. As Robb finished, Grey Wind came into the pen next to him. The direwolf stood at least 5 feet tall. Jaime's face was a form of veiled fear, wondering what Robb was about to do to him. I came to you to speak about your son. Robb said as he gripped Grey Wind's fur as if to hold him back. I have no son. Jaime said, his eyes never leaving the direwolf. Come now, Kingslayer. The truth has been exposed, there is no need to lie. Robb said with a smirk, toying with the chained knight. Joffrey Baratheon is neither a true king nor a true Baratheon. He's your bastard son. Robb said, his smirk gone. My father learned the truth, which is why you had him executed. Robb said, anger rising again, Grey Wind becoming agitated. I was your prisoner when Ned Stark lost his head. Jaime said, looking up at Robb, then back to the direwolf. Your son had him killed after he revealed the truth to the court. Robb said through gritted teeth. If you are going to kill me, you had better just do it, boy. Jaime said defiantly, Grey Wind snarls growing as he licked his chops. Robb gave it half a thought before relenting. I haven't kept you alive all this time just to kill you now, Sir Jaime. Robb said as he pushed his anger down. I just wanted to check on you, make sure you had every accommodation you might need to survive. Robb said, feigning politeness. To keep me to negotiate with my father. You don't know him well. Jaime said as the direwolf calmed a bit. No, but he is starting to know me. Robb said as he looked down at Jaime. 5 victories don't make you a conqueror. Jaime spat back as Robb had mentioned through a veil, he was winning the war. It's better than 5 defeats. Robb said as he stepped back, turned, and unleashed Grey Wind, who lurched forward hard at the Kingslayer. Jaime drew back as best he could, the direwolf snapping and snarling at him inches from his face before leaving Jaime a picture of fear in his pen. Robb Stark had sated his desire to relish in the Kingslayer's fear. It was childish but not harmful to their cause. Robb still felt as though he was dealing with his father's death in his own way. He knew he would grow and the cocky behavior he had just demonstrated would leave him. It was better than drinking at least. Robb yearned for Margaery's touch, her love, her everything. He felt as though he had been gone too long and all he wanted to do was feel her in his arms again. He wanted to hold their child. The flap opened to the war council tent where his lords had gathered on his request. They stood when Robb entered, and gone was the husband yearning for his wife. The king had work to do. Your Grace, we received a raven from Bitterbridge. Garland said with what Robb could tell was not a happy look on his face. Bitterbridge was where they had an army stationed to defend the Reach. Robb immediately thought that his mother had been taken prisoner and now Renly attacked them. Robb nodded, his fear palpable. Your mother sends word that Renly Baratheon is dead. Murdered by Stannis. She did not say how, only that she would tell you herself what had done it, as she did not feel as though she had the strength to describe what she saw. Garland said, a hush falling over the tent. It was good that Lady Stark was alive, but every man in the tent also knew how strong she was. What had she seen to shake her so much? She rides to us with Loras and Brian of Tarth, one of Renly's Kingsguard who escaped with her. Her letter was also accompanied by a letter from Garth Greysteel Hightower, the commander of the force at Bitterbridge. He says that Stannis has taken all of Renly's forces and has begun marching towards the capital. Garland finished handing the 2 letters to Robb, who examined them quickly and then addressed his lord. Good tidings and bad. Stannis murders our hopeful ally but marches on the capital anyways. Robb paused, thinking and looking at his map of the continent, examining all of the forces that were in motion. We continue as planned. Robb said, his lords nodding in approval. We will split our force into 5 hosts. I will keep 1 host with me here to guard our route back to the Riverlands. Lord Umber, Sir Brynden, Lord Royce, and Sir Garland, you will each take 16,000 men and take every keep, hold fast, and town in the Westerlands except for Lannisport and the Rock. We will discuss specifics tomorrow, but I want you to begin preparing to march your forces from here. How is Lord Tyrell's force faring? Robb asked Garland. He and Lord Tarly have besieged Cricker Hall and are preparing to storm the castle. Garland replied. The force was nominally commanded by Mace, but Randyll Tarly was effectively the commander. He had marched 40,000 men uncontested to Cricker Hall. Once they took it, they would be able to lay siege to Lannisport. The Red Wine Fleet has already begun its blockade of Lannisport. Robb asked, making sure they were in position. Yes, Your Grace. Theon responded, having managed the fleet to land communications. Good. We will begin starving them out. We need to take the castles here in the Westerlands so that we can attack the Rock uncontested. Sieges are an option, but I would prefer if you assaulted the keeps. Use your heads and try and find ways to lessen any losses we might suffer. We may get reinforcements from our home regions in a couple of months, but I will not allow for our army to be risked for the sake of making this a war of attrition. Robb said, laying out his will. If you believe you could take heavy losses in an assault, you figure out a different way. We will not risk our army unnecessarily. Robb finished the last part, being very clear to each commanding lord. You are all dismissed. Rest tonight and return in the morning. We will meet just after the sun has risen. Robb said, dismissing his lords, leaving only he, Jon, and Theon. Any word from Winterfell? Robb asked, praying to hear either news of his wife and child or news of his siblings' arrival. Yes. Jon said simply. Robb looked at him expectantly and Jon gave a small smile. They made it home. Jon said, watching Robb's face relax as he gave the news that their siblings had arrived safely home. In Winterfell, Margaery stood waiting for her good siblings in the yard. She was heavy with child but still as beautiful as ever. She looked sad, however. She had been alone in Winterfell while news of the man she loved came few and far between. But now she would be surrounded with family again as Sir Roderick rode through the gates and behind him the Stark children and their 3 massive wolves. Margaery had ruled in Winterfell as the new queen. She was loved and adored by the people who would defend her fiercely. Margaery had kept them safe and been strong for them. The picture of beauty, pregnant and regal, she stood there, crown on her head. A more perfect representation of a mother to her people, there was not. But when she saw the Stark children, tears finally came. He was holding Rickon's hand but had to let go as she walked towards them. Sansa saw her first and quickly got down from her horse. Margaery! Sansa yelled, tears in her own eyes. Sansa could see the beauty that was Margaery in front of her. Her crown was a simple silver circlet studded with 9 sapphires. Her dress was a silver grey with blue vines woven through it. Margaery was almost running at this point and she met Sansa in a loving embrace. They held each other and Margaery ran a hand through her good sister's hair as Sansa sobbed. They were home, they were safe. Margaery shushed Sansa as the ran a hand through Sansa's auburn hair to soothe her crying. Arya came running up and then Bran, both crying as they hugged Margaery and Sansa, and the 4 together held each other. Against the storm, against the lion, against whatever may come, they had each other. Rickon had finally grown impatient and Margaery felt the little boy near her feet. She laughed as she broke their embrace, wiping tears from her eyes as she picked him up and put him on her hip. Sansa finally remembered her manners and through tears curtsied. Your Grace. Sansa said with a smile. After all of that, you think we are going to stand on formality? Margaery replied with a laugh which was joined by the other Stark children. They all had lost a father, but they were together again. They were out of the lion's reach, but not out of the Cricken's. Robb had to be roused from a deep sleep. His direwolf already standing at attention when Jon woke him. Robb. Robb, you need to wake up. Jon said, having just been awoken himself. Jon had gotten dressed when the messenger woke him up and informed him who had entered the camp. Jon had spoken to the emissary himself and realized Robb needed to hear this. For God's sake, Jon, if you are waking me up before I am needed at the council meeting, I am going to, Robb said, rubbing his eyes before Jon cut him off. Robb, shut up and get dressed, Asha Greyjoy is here, and she needs to speak with you. Jon said with a slight panic. Robb was confused as to what was going on. His brother was worried. Why was Asher Greyjoy here? Robb threw back his furs and got out of bed dressing in simple leathers and his own fur cloak before allowing Jon to bring her in. She looked tired. Her hair was cropped and in her Greyjoy armor she could have been confused for a man. Robb could see the similarity between her and Theon. She was lean like he was and did look older than him. Her hair and eyes were dark, and she looked as if she had travelled a long way. "Lady Asher, you stand in the presence of Robb," Jon began but stopped. "Robb, I'm sorry you need to hear what she has to say, and you need to hear it now," Jon said, stopping the ceremony. He was panicked and whatever Asher had to tell him it was bad. Robb nodded and Asher began. "Your Grace, my father is dead. He was killed by my uncle, Victorian Greyjoy. Victorian has taken a portion of the Iron Fleet, sworn to the Seastone Chair and declared himself King of the Iron Islands." The king was in shock. If Balon was gone it should mean that Theon was their lord, which would normally have been good news, but this would not be the good news he was hoping for. "Your Grace, he sails north with 50 longships. I believe he means to sack Winterfell." Notes. "So I am going to address the big elephant in the room that I think everyone is thinking. Victorian Greyjoy may not have done this if given the chance. I know and I get it. When I originally wrote this, Victorian was actually Euron and it made more sense initially. But as you will see in coming chapters, if Euron had stayed as the King of the Iron Islands it would have made less sense. Just trust me, it is better that the antagonist Greyjoy is Victorian and not Euron. I also may want to save Euron for later depending on his character's true intentions in the coming Winds of Winter book, that will hopefully be released this year. Euron is probably one of the most terrifying antagonists in all of literature and I honestly do not believe I can write him in a just manner. I honestly believe that if I used Euron as the Greyjoy antagonist, I would make many of you very mad at me. Many of you had comments on the last chapter about how the story will function moving forward with the way changes have been made. I will be commenting on specific comments after I post this, but I want to just generally say that 1, you guys are so amazing with how engaged you are, and 2, I promise I will tie up as many loose ends with parts 2 and 3 of this story as I possibly can. With that said, a little bit more on this chapter. I wanted to introduce a new conflict that would sort of wrap up the Iron Islands angle of the story. I can't promise the conflict will be long, but it will be handled. Next chapter is about what happens with Theon in this story and how he has changed. I am sure you all also noticed the conflict with Davos, which is going to be very important moving forward. And more than that, we will begin to see some stuff with Tyrion that will change the direction of his story as well. I hope you all continue to keep enjoying. Chapter 33, You're a Greyjoy and You're a Stark. Notes. Okay, there is a lot of time that flies by in this chapter, so just be prepared for that and I hope you enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Theon, get up. Jon yelled as he flew into his and Theon's shared tent. Shit. Theon yelled as he fell out of a hammock he had hung inside the tent. He drew a dagger next, but when he came to his senses, he lowered it and scowled at Jon. "Why in 7 hells are you?" Theon started but was cut off by Jon. "Your sister is here. She needs to speak with you right now. Get dressed, come to Robb's tent," Jon said as he left a very stunned Theon. Theon hadn't seen his older sister since he had been taken to foster in Winterfell. Why was she here? Back in Robb's tent, Robb and Asher stood with only Robb's Wolfsguard present. "How do you know Victorian is going to the north?" Robb asked, unsure of whether he could trust the woman in front of him. "Because when Victorian made his plea to the Lords of the Iron Islands after he killed my father, he said you had no army stop him and that his faster longships could slip past your lumbering warships," Asher said simply. Problem was, he crowned himself without a king's moot when the Lords did not support the idea and the Lords of the Iron Islands don't appreciate kinslaying. He couldn't even bring the whole of the Iron Fleet to his side, let alone the other Ironborn and their ships. He was able to take half the fleet and sail north, Asher said coldly, remembering. "I have no reason to trust that what you tell me is the truth," Robb said coldly. Robb did not know her, and he did not trust her. "If you do not trust me, fine, but Theon is the Lord of the Iron Islands by rights. Let him sail back with me. You trust him. If I am lying, he returns to you. If I am not, he may just make you King of the Isles." Asher said, pointing out Rob did not have a ton to lose. It could be that Asher was going to try to kill Theon. She could be the one that killed Balon and now wants to kill Theon to secure her seat. But she had to have known Rob could mitigate this by simply sending Theon on a red wine ship crewed with loyal men. She would never be able to touch Theon en route to the Iron Islands, and when they got there the lords would rally to Theon, making him even more untouchable to her. No, she was not lying. If I send him with you, how do I know you won't kill him? Rob said, eyes narrowing. If he even detected a hint of a lie, he would kill Asher here. No one was going to harm Theon. He is my brother. I would kill the entire world for him. Asher stopped and looked at Rob more closely. Just as I imagine you would. Asher finished. There was no lie, and between her and Rob there existed a mutual understanding of what Theon meant to each one. The flap to the tent opened and Theon stood dumbstruck for a moment at the woman in front of him. I take my leave, was all Rob had to say as he left his own tent. While